Cinemodities, late night movies with Rob, Ben, and Zach. This is a podcast about cinematic oddities, where we discuss any media that is too bizarre, abnormal, or off-kilter for contemporary audiences. Occasionally, these projects gel. Most times they crash, hard, into the realm of obscurity. Join us as we delve into the cult classic swamp. I'm Ben.
Sell 30 April at 142! So this is the thing. When Dan Aykroyd screams to sell at the end of this movie in one of the best scenes in cinematic history on the World Trade Center commodities trading floor, I heard it as sell 30 April at 142. Apparently some subtitles say sell 200 April at 142. So I was like, I gotta find the script or a draft of the script. This line is not in the script. So nobody really knows what Dan Aykroyd says in this part of the movie, which I absolutely love. But I want to sell 30 contracts of OJ in April at $1.42. Can you get behind that?
The Amazon Prime subtitle says 200.
Okay, so I've seen 200, 30, 52, 300, 180, and 60. Those were all the different ones I found.
Some of those are very different than the other ones.
Exactly. So we are going to talk about selling orange juice futures in this episode. It's going to be a very financial-based episode. I hope our guests are here. I know Ben, of course, he sells a lot of frozen concentrate orange juice on the stock market. I think that's his main job. And I'm glad to have someone else on the podcast who does the same exact thing, just in a different country. We have none other than Chris P. You might remember him or know him from Knights of Vader as what Zach says, the 5th or 6th best Star Wars collector in Canada. Chris, I just want to say, I think you're the best Star Wars collector in Canada. I don't know how you rank those things.
Well, there's only at most 20 of us, so like the lead varies quite a bit. Like, you know, you have to, if you check in month to month, I usually hover between 5th and 8th most of the time.
So is that by amount or like rate at which you collect? I don't know. Like, how do you rank that?
It's like a equation between like amount and social status and like all kinds of delightful features. How much you're engaging with everyone else at the time, you know. So many flexes you do online.
So there's a complicated formula.
Oh yeah, it's why you don't even really pay too much attention to it. You should really only check twice a year. You'll lose your mind otherwise.
How much paperwork is involved in becoming officially a collector of Star Wars memorabilia? Did you have to get it notarized, whatever it was that you signed, that got you included on the list?
There, like I said, when you only got 20 of us, like they really don't pressure you too hard to keep your paperwork up to date. It's pretty easy.
So but it's kind of like a blockchain thing, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. In the States, it's a lot harder. It's a lot more competitive. You know, it's an extreme league over there. But yeah, it's pretty laid back here. I'm happy to be here, guys, discussing what is unequivocally one of the funniest movies I've ever seen.
All right. Yeah, no, Chris, we thank you for being here. This is, of course, continuing our FansGiving series, and for the very first time, I believe, we have the fan that requested the movie on the episode. And we figured since we've had Chris talking through Cinemodities before, never on the show, we'd have him on to really get at trading places. Before we get into trading places and all that stuff, a few orders of business to take care of. I think the first thing we can discuss is, of course, as all of the audience members are becoming nauseated at, Ben and I have to remind the Cinem audience that there is now a Cinemodities Patreon. And at this point in time, there are 4 things available, 2 from the month of October, 2 from November, and you can have access to all of those for $5 a month. Very exciting. Check it out. We'll throw the link in the show notes. I know I've done some shameless plugs on Facebook and the Cinemodities subreddit, but Ben, is there anything that you would like to say about our Patreon?
Do you think that we can sell futures for our Patreon?
Patreon futures? Do you think the $5 is going to change next month?
Yes, I think next month it'll be worth $7. So.
Ooh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I guess maybe. I don't see why not. With our grand total of 0 patrons right now, I'm sure the market will be flooded with people looking at futures for that as well. I'm interested in people selling futures for the Patreon, because it'll be like, next month you can get on this Patreon I'm not involved with for $7.
But yeah, come check it out. We are producing lots of good content there, and as of right now, nobody gets to listen to it. So it's, I don't know. Come check it out.
One day. I think once we have enough content, the floodgates will open. We'll have those fans who are just like, I want to binge Cinemodities for a whole day straight, you know? And four episodes doesn't quite cut that.
Yeah, we'll get there.
You guys just need to let Zach go on some lunatic rants about why The Office is stupid and why modern horror movies are terrible. And if you get a couple like hour-long just lunatic rants like that on there, I'm sure you'd get some traction.
I actually just pitched something similar to Rob recently. It's not specifically about media, but it is lunatic ranting. So,
yeah, I think we mentioned it last week, Ben, but also in the November 1st Patreon episode, it's like an episode in two halves. The first hour 15 is us talking about the movie, and the second hour 15 is us ranting about math and Common Core and racism. And the racism ties back into this movie.
So we're discussing Trading Places, right? This came out in the 80s?
Yes, 83. Yep.
There were a lot of things back then that were still okay that I think are not okay today. But I think Chris is an expert in one of them because he's from Canada, and I think Trudeau was recently outed for having done blackface. Is this true, Chris?
We're going there right off the bat. Okay.
Well, this is like 70% of the way into the movie, so we're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, I think. But this is Cinemodities, right? So like we could get ridiculous and try to ideologically unpack what Justin Trudeau's quote unquote blackface was about. I'm totally ready to do that, but maybe we'll save it for that. I don't know. Do you guys try and go chronologically through the movie here to some degree or what?
Try is probably the operative word. Fail is probably the successful word.
Because there's so much good stuff before that.
Yeah, we'll talk about all of it.
Yes. So I'm glad you're setting the stage, though, Ben, with the blackface, with the racism. We have an N-word alert in this episode, of course, which I always like to point out. Only one use of it. I think we'll have to unpack that as well. But I do want to start by saying, well, of course, as always, Zach is not here. The audience now knows Ben is not Zach. I think they know Chris is not Zach because they've heard them on Knights of Vader before. Where is he? Of course he's at the restaurant. I don't think he's pulling his weight at the restaurant this week. I think he is simultaneously watching The Mandalorian and practicing his choreography for the upcoming December series. That's a little spoiler for our audience. I have not listened to Zach's thoughts, whether it be on podcast or when he usually tells me these things about The Mandalorian. But real quick tangent, Chris, since I'm assuming you've seen it, what the one episode we've gotten so far at the time of this recording. How many Baby Yodas have baby jetpacks? Because that was my call on Cinemodities has been the first episode of The Mandalorian was going to be 6,000 Baby Yodas in tiny baby jetpacks fighting, I don't know, AT-ATs or something like that.
I think that is both, like, I think that's a great metric. You should totally protest watching it until they make that happen. And because it's plausible. If you look at it from Zach's perspective, that would get a lot of people watching. So as ridiculous as that sounds to someone who sort of pays attention to the show, like stranger things have happened already, I think. But we're still at zero though. It's no Baby Yoda jetpacks quite yet.
That's all I want.
These Baby Yoda creatures, are they? I think if I understand correctly, they're all like Force users. Is that correct?
All three that have ever been seen are. Yeah.
Okay. So has the Baby Yoda in Mandalorian used the Force?
Oh
yes,
yeah. Lifts up rhinos and shit.
That's actually even though I really disliked most of the first season of Mandalorian, the best scene was probably the one where Baby Yoda uses the Force and the Mandalorian is like, "What the fuck just happened?"
You can see that expression right through his blank helmet face. It's great.
Ben, have you seen any of the Mandalorian?
I haven't. I do not have Disney Plus. That's not the streaming service I'm using for these couple months. I'm on HBO Max right now. I kind of try to rotate them.
Sure. Okay. Right on.
Well, all that's on Disney Plus is 8 episodes of The Mandalorian and The Simpsons, which is zoomed in 4x3 episodes to make them widescreen. So like you're really, it worked. I forgot I had Disney Plus and paid for it every month till The Mandalorian came back. Their plan worked.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I know Zach and I have talked about this a lot. We did a lot when we did our last episode of Monstober on the Treehouse of Horror episodes. When, like, for some reason, when Fox owned The Simpsons and they aired it. Remember, Ben, we talked about that when they did the Simpsons marathon for, like, 16 days. They played every episode in a row on FXX or whatever.
Yeah.
Those were all zoomed in. The aspect ratio was wrong. You miss most of the sight gags. Fox gets bought by Disney, and Disney's like, fuck it, we're not going to fix this. And that's how it exists on Disney+. And it's insane.
Oh my God, that's terrible.
I mean, I don't think I think people sometimes get a little bit extreme when they talk about it ruining like all the jokes, but like it's just criminal behavior. Like,
yes.
I don't care if it even ruins the jokes. It's like embarrassingly stupid. Why would you ever zoom in something standard def so that it can be widescreen? It's just like it should never have been allowed. It's for idiots who scream and throw things at their TV when it doesn't fill the whole screen. Like, I don't know who these people are, but they have no business being alive, much less to make filing complaints about The Simpsons. It's ridiculous.
Chris, you're gonna fit it right in here. We like to say really mean things to the audience.
Disenfranchising the listeners, absolutely.
I guess I have one question about Disney Plus. Is the movie Brink on there? Because that could be a redeeming quality.
If it's good and or controversial in any way, probably not.
Hey. I mean, Brink is like a Disney original.
Yeah, I think it's gotta be on there. I mean, I haven't checked Disney Plus. I do have someone's access information Disney Plus, but I've never logged into it because I'm just like, I don't think there's anything I want to watch on there. Except Tailspin. I do really want to watch Tailspin again because someone shared me like a few episodes of Tailspin. So that's the Jungle Book spinoff where Baloo the bear is like a pilot, like a shipping pilot. Okay, yes, this is the right. I'm getting weird facial expressions from everybody right here. This is the thing. There's 3 main characters on Tailspin, and I love this. The main one is Baloo the bear, who's the main character or the main animal from Jungle Book. You have Kit, who's the little kid bear that like hangs around with everybody, and then you have the girl, Rebecca Cunningham. Those are legitimately their 3 names, and I love it. Baloo, Kit, Rebecca Cunningham. I need to watch more of this show.
Is there like an orangutan in this show? I feel like I've seen this before.
That's just another Jungle Book character.
Yeah, he's probably like adapted to be like his boss of the shipping company or something, I would imagine. Okay. I know the tiger from the Jungle Book is the sky pirate that tries to hijack them a lot. Like he's the main antagonist.
Do you have any idea why they decided to take Jungle Book characters and give them professions?
I do not know enough of the history about Tailspin that I should, but I need to see more of it. I just love the fact that there's a main character animal called Rebecca Cunningham. That might be my favorite thing from 2020.
I don't think it's from 2020.
Oh, she's an animal too?
That I found out in 2020.
Oh, okay, yeah. She is. She's, I'm looking at her now. She looks like, I guess, a bear.
I think she's a bear, but no, I want to backtrack, Ben. I know you didn't really think I thought Tailspin was a 2020 show when I already mentioned I watched it in my childhood.
I was just being a dick, Rob.
That's like when we were talking about Shaun of the Dead, and she's like, Shaun of the Dead's not from the 70s. And we're like, thank you, Justin. We know that.
Yeah, there's an orangutan. I watched this as a child. This is nostalgic, Rob.
I think I'm just like 2 or 3 years older, and like I thought it was lame and didn't watch it. That's probably what it was. Yeah. Okay. I remember seeing it, and now that you say Baloo was a pilot, I'm like, that was Baloo? Weird. But that's my only reaction to that. Yeah. I'm out.
So this episode has gone off the rails completely already. I think Ben is hard at work looking at the details of Tailspin right now. Maybe we'll have to do a whole Tailspin series, because I think there's only like 50 episodes total or something. We could do a 5 Monday month, 10 episodes each. But, of course, we have to get into our movie of the week, Trading Places, the 1983 film. And I think what better way to start, since we already mentioned that this is a FansGiving film requested by Chris himself. So I don't know if you looked back at this, Chris, but just for some context on why we picked this, I remember that there was some episode of Cinemodities that Zach and I were talking about, and Trading Places came up for some reason. And I was like, oh, we should do that one day, but it's not really pressing. Zach was like, I have no idea what this movie is, other than I've heard of it, Eddie Murphy in one of his breakout roles. And we just had Trading Places in the spreadsheet under FansGiving for so long. And the one thing that always stood out is that in our spreadsheet, we have the name of the movie, and then in the next column over, we have who requested it. And Trading Places was blank for so long, because it was such an early request that we didn't write down who requested it. And for so much time, Zach and I were like, who requested this? And I was like, I would have to dig back through the Facebook group, because I think that's where it came from. And I finally did. I did a good old search on the Knights of Vader Facebook group for Trading Places, and I found when Chris posted this exact statement. You guys should go ahead and halt everything going on with Cinemoddities and do Trading Places. Rob clearly forgets how great it is if he thinks it's not that urgent that you watch it. It's going to change your life, Zach. You guys love to talk about high comedy films that could never be made today. And then a laughing emoji. So I took this as a request. I think this is a true request. But I think I want to throw it over to you, Chris. Why did you want us to halt everything and talk about this movie? Why is this something you requested? What's your history with this and all that stuff?
All right, so it seems fitting after reading back that comment from months ago that Zach is not here, and hopefully he did end up watching it anyways. But that's besides the point for tonight. But basically, the reason the comment is like that is because I was just knowing how steeped Zach is in cinema, and the fact that he has this podcast, it seemed appalling to me that he commented live on a podcast that he hadn't seen it before. And it's like, this is one of those, like, this was a sort of a formative movie experience for me, if we're getting into context a little bit, because this is something that, like, I don't know about anymore, but what is TV anymore? But this used to play on cable a lot, like way back. And like, I don't know exactly what parts were censored. I don't know exactly what was changed or what alternate takes were used. But this is like one of those movies where, like, if I was at my grandma's at Christmas, she would insist that it be on because she thought it was like the funniest thing ever.
Okay.
This is a grandma who's like, this is a Matlock Murder, She Wrote grandma who thought that Trading Places was like the funniest thing she'd ever seen. And she like loved Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, and like she was adamant that it'd be on. So like that was my exposure to it, being a kid, seeing it at Christmas, and my grandma thought it was hilarious, and it turned out to be scientifically true that it is hilarious when I watched it. So my assessment of her judgment was pretty high at that point.
Right on, right on. No, this was, interestingly enough, something that I was introduced to when I was really young. Of course, with what we talked about in that Facebook post, I had known about it. I had watched this a lot when I was younger. I had some people in my life that were also in the same boat. They were like, this is hilarious, you should check it out. I remember very, like, pointedly when I was younger that I thought a lot of it was funny, but I had no idea what was happening at the end of the movie. But it still stuck in my kind of purview. And then when I was in my undergrad and I was taking finance classes, like in 2011, 2012, that's right in 2010, which we'll have to talk about with this movie, and I have a whole story about. Like, that's when the Frank Dodd Act got passed that actually made insider trading illegal. And I had a teacher who was like, we're going to watch the end of Trading Places and talk about how the Eddie Murphy rule now exists in U.S. finance law. And I was like, oh, that's what's going on at the end. They're buying and then selling at different prices. And I was like, when I was a kid, like 10, 12 years old, I was just like, yeah, they bankrupted the bad guys. Good for them. And I had no other context. But then I watched it. I was shown that part of the movie. I think I watched it with my roommates because I was like, yo, this movie's great. Everybody was like, this is very racially insensitive. And I was like, yeah, but it's pretty funny other than that very minor stuff, which I'm sure we'll get into. But then I watched this movie a few more times. I think when whatever episode of Cinemoddities it came up on that I, talked about it, I hadn't seen it in a few years. And I'm so glad I got to rewatch it on this viewing or for this recording, because I have to say, the juxtaposition of dry wit humor and slapstick screwball type comedy in this movie is fascinating. Like, at one point you have Dan Aykroyd and the girlfriend, Kristen Holby, who's Penelope Witherspoon, like the fanciest name ever. They're talking about, like, oh, I can't attend the party that day. That's when the Krupp report comes out, and they're getting undressed before they have sex. Like, that's such dry humor compared to, like, Eddie Murphy running around dodging the police in, like, the supper club or whatever. And I'm like, this movie is insane. So I have to agree with you, Chris. I found this very, very funny as well. I love the fact that the last 20 minutes is, like, a screwball insider trading stock comedy, which I don't think has ever existed or will ever exist again, which I greatly appreciate. So I'm with you there. So I guess with that being said, we'll throw it over you, Ben. Have you ever heard of this, seen this before, prior to this, and then what were your thoughts if you have or haven't?
So no, I don't think I had ever heard of this movie before. I definitely hadn't seen it. The imagery on the poster that came up whenever I searched for it on my streaming device looked really familiar. So I was like, oh, I've definitely like this movie existed while I've been alive, but that's pretty much about all I can say about it.
Okay.
And from the description you had given me, you said, it's called Trading Places, and you said something about people swapping lives, and I was definitely imagining like the I think, what was it, like the Queen Latifah movie, Down to Earth or something, where somebody's at, like they actually like swap bodies, and it's like, so I was imagining that kind of story.
Sure.
And when I watched it, I was definitely like, pretty quickly I was like, oh, that's not what's going to happen. But so for the first like 10 minutes or so, I expected them to get hit by a bus or some shit,
or lightning or something like that.
Yeah, and then like they would die together and then come back as each other or something. So I totally had like a false expectation for the beginning of this movie. After watching it, I gotta say, I generally don't like things that look old. Rob knows this about me. I'm kind of an ageist when it comes to movies. This movie was not that off-putting for me. It was fine. I do think that the first 2 or 3 minute like setup shot, like they knew that this movie was going to live beyond when it was created, because they spent a lot of time showing us the setting. They were like, the people who are watching this aren't going to have any clue where it's from, so they need to know. And they showed us for like 5 minutes. They were like, look, this is the way it is. This is the way life is. So I thought that was pretty interesting that they spent that much time on a setup shot. But overall, I think I had a good time watching it. And I have to say, early on, Eddie Murphy being a legless, blind, homeless person, that was a good time for me. It was definitely a point of confusion. I was like, I know he's a main character. Is he going to be legless the whole time?
Yes. That's a good point. I'm glad you bring that up, because I think Chris and I, knowing this movie, we know that that's not the case. But watching this cold, that's a really interesting idea, especially because he has lines like when he first, right before he gets busted by the cops, he like is harassing that woman, and he says something like, "Once you go with a legless man, you don't go back." And I'm like, oh wow, he's leaning into it.
And I do like that he's like rolling around on what looks like a furniture moving platform. It reminded me of like those carts that you used to play on, like in elementary school PE. The things that you'd like run over your fingers with them every time that you had them. So I was like, this is going to be interesting if he's doing this the whole movie.
That would have been a very interesting, like, imagine this premise with, the social experiment, or the scientific experiment, as the Dukes call it, where they try and switch Dan Aykroyd out with a legless war veteran. No, so I'm glad you enjoyed it, for sure. I think that, whenever we talk about comedies of the 80s, especially the early 80s, this one, it's always kind of a hit or miss because it was such a different time. And I'm sure we'll talk about that with the comedy and, how it holds up today. But I would be remiss, as I think Chris and Ben know, and I also think our cinema audience knows, this movie is directed by John Landis. I would like to go around the room. If we could all describe John Landis in one word, what would it be? Ben, I want to start with you. Manslaughterer. Okay, Ben, correct. Chris, what do you think?
So
manslaughter.
I wouldn't mind getting into that just very briefly, because I did hear your American Werewolf in London episode, where that was actually my introduction to the story of the manslaughtering.
Oh, okay.
And so I looked into it a little bit, and I was like, surely there's more to it than it being entirely Landis's fault. And I mean, there kind of is. A lot of stuff had to go wrong. Like, parents of child actors allowing them to work a little bit outside of the rules. Mm-hmm. Safety inspectors not really making a big deal out of the potential hazards. It was a confluence of bad decisions that resulted in those deaths.
Yes.
And I guess at the end of the day, somebody's the boss, and they're technically responsible. But a lot of different things had to go wrong for that to happen. And I don't know if I hold Mr. Landis morally responsible. Perhaps technically responsible, but I don't know if I hold him morally responsible.
Okay.
Did you just defend a child murderer? I don't know anything about this manslaughter case, so my opinion on it is definitely moot.
Well, he wasn't flying the helicopter. Let's start with that.
Well, all right.
Yeah.
Yes. So my one word, of course, would be manslaughter as well. So as we do get into it a lot in the American Werewolf in London episode, I think this is a good kind of juxtaposition, that movie and this movie, because American Werewolf was prior to the incident. This was the movie that he filmed directly after the incident happened. So, there's definitely some differences there. But I think, Chris, you bring up a really good point. I'll say it again if anybody has not heard our American Werewolf in London episode. I do know, of course, that after the long trial, John Landis did get acquitted, but so did OJ. That's my thoughts on it. I am in kind of agreement with you, Chris, that I don't know if I would hold him completely responsible. There's a lot more people on the set of movies that make certain things go wrong when they do go wrong, which I totally get. But I think this brings up exactly what I wanted to discuss, because John Landis and Eddie Murphy have worked together a lot. This was one of their first times they worked together, but they have done a lot of other stuff. I mean, Coming to America, Beverly Hills Cop 3, and they've known each other for a long time. And very famously, Eddie Murphy refused to be a character witness for John Landis during the trial, where John Landis was like, I need someone to be on my behalf, and he asked Eddie Murphy, and Eddie Murphy said no. And then years later in an interview, Eddie Murphy said, and I quote, and I think the quote sums up exactly how I feel about this. Eddie Murphy says, I don't want to say who was guilty or who was innocent, but if you're directing a movie and 2 kids get their heads chopped off at 12 o'clock at night when there ain't supposed to be kids working, and you said action, then you have some sort of responsibility. So my principals wouldn't let me go down there and sit in court. That's just the way I am. And that's kind of how I feel. He was the one who was in charge of that set, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, first, hold on. Okay, all right, let's get into it. So,
let's unpack John Landis being a manslaughterer again.
So, yeah, let's continue defending John Landis. Okay, so first of all, in Eddie Murphy's perspective, yeah, if I'm Eddie Murphy, going down there to defend the guy who is potentially responsible for 2 kids getting their heads chopped off, it's a bad look. If I'm Eddie Murphy, I will get out of that at all costs, for sure. And like I said, he's absolutely right that he has some level of responsibility. But there's a guy on set whose job is to set up explosives, and there's a guy on set whose job is to safely fly a helicopter, and there's a guy on set who is supposed to tell John Landis if something bad is going on and the explosives are too close. And all these people are too afraid to challenge their boss and do their job. So, I don't know if I hold him morally responsible, but I'd be afraid to be a character witness too in that trial. So I give Eddie Murphy a pass on that one.
That's a good point. That's a good point for sure.
I mean, knowing absolutely nothing about this, I am going to go out and say I think John Landis maybe learned something from it, because there are very few risks taken in this movie.
Physical health risks, you mean?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
That's...
Okay. All right.
Not racial risks, physical risks.
There were no explosions. I don't even think the gorilla was real. Like, this was a pretty tame...
The gorilla was Don McLeod, the mime. Yeah.
You don't think the gorilla was real, eh? I'm not too sure myself. It looked pretty real.
It was, I mean, the way it was standing completely upright like a person, I wasn't sure.
Well, I found that to be the most insensitive part of the movie when Gleason, the guy who plays Clarence Beeks, dresses up as a gorilla. Like, I'm not for that. Like, you're not a gorilla. Don't represent a gorilla, right? That's
a valid point. I'm glad that gorilla rights have come up this early in the episode.
All right. Well, like if we want to just I feel the urge to just give this a little bit of structure. So
do we want to do a plot rundown, Chris? Do you want to give us a plot rundown of this movie?
I'm glad you bring that up, Ben, because this movie is insanely popular, which is one of the things I'm glad we have you on here, Ben, because you had never heard of it, as you said. This was the 4th highest grossing film of 1983, which still blows my mind that this weird screwball / dry wit comedy could have done that well. Of course, as everybody knows, 1983, the highest grossing movie ever, is the best Star Wars film. Ben, do you have a guess what the best Star Wars film is?
The Phantom Menace?
Yes, that was 83, definitely. Return of the Jedi. I think objectively best. Don't at me, Chris. Objectively best Star Wars film. Okay. I know Zach always makes fun of me for that, but
it's definitely not the worst answer by a long shot.
Is Phantom Menace the worst answer? Because that's what I was going for. Are there any that are worse than that?
Yeah.
Oh.
Chris is like, I don't know how much I should get on this. This isn't Knights of Vader. Zach's not here, but like, Ben, come on. I think Chris is getting the sense that Ben and I are on the same wavelength of Star Wars. We just know about it and are intrigued by it slightly.
I don't want to start because I like really jacked up a Knights of Vader episode last week, like badly, like it's ugly. So like I don't want just try. Don't steer me in that direction. It's not going to be helpful.
Okay, fair. Okay, well then, of course, this movie got beat out by Return of the Jedi. That was number 1. Number 2 was Terms of Endearment, the James L. Brooks movie, which is a fantastic movie. Number 3 was Flashdance. And then you have this. So talk about a time for movies when you could have 4 very different movies. A science fiction Star Wars film, a cancer drama, a dancing movie, and then a racially insensitive comedy as the top 4 for a year in the U.S. domestic box office. But no, Ben, you're probably right. And Chris, we should give this some structure. Would you like to break down the plot for us on this movie you've requested, Chris?
All right, so basically, like Ben was saying, it starts out with this really long montage highlighting the scope of society in New York City at this time.
Hey kids, Chris meant Philadelphia.
And you see a lot of poor people hanging out outside doing homeless stuff, and you see a lot of rich people doing tennis club type stuff, and it just gives you an overview of society at the time, and we get in this montage we get introduced to Randolph and Mortimer Duke, who are the like, help me out, Rob. What is their job titles exactly? How do you describe these two guys?
I think they're officially commodities brokers, but I think more importantly, they are the live-action adaptation of the Muppets Statler and Waldorf.
Right, and they're exactly, and they're running Duke, and you see their posh lifestyle where they come down from bed in the morning and they have like 4 different butlers on their way to getting ready for work and getting in their car, like a butler for each task of the day, getting their slippers on and having breakfast and all that stuff.
Do they live together?
I think it implied that in the same giant mansion. They sort of came from opposing staircases at the beginning of the day. Yeah. So basically, I think where this starts to get really interesting is these two guys finally get to what they would categorize as work. And
that's great.
Mortimer's reading. Mortimer's like the more business oriented of the two. He's reading he's watching the markets. He's paying attention to stuff. While Randolph, he's one of these guys who was perhaps. I mean, we'll say it now. These guys are both pretty racist, but they're racist in very different ways.
Yes.
Like Mortimer is like a more traditional actual racist, and Randolph is one of those guys who, like, it's almost more a product of his cultural existence rather than what he actually thinks.
I love that setup in the car, and then when they get to, like you said, what they call work, is when he's reading the magazine, and he's like, they gave the Nobel Prize to this geneticist. Like, this makes no sense. Like, I love that setup for the whole nature versus nurture thing in this movie.
Yeah, it's great because it shows that it's funny that, Randolph's not that interested in the comings and goings of his actual job because he's realized there's not that much to it for him, and he's reading like totally unrelated things in the newspaper and trying to comment on them to his brother, who could not be less interested. And it's almost like he's trying to find some things that are more intellectual to think about during the day instead of working, and he wants to be entertained by the science story in the newspaper, and his brother's completely uninterested.
Yeah, I think Mortimer, when Randolph says there's more to life than money, Mortimer tells him to grow up, which struck me as very strange.
Mother always said you were greedy. She meant it as a compliment.
Yeah, these guys are both. I think we're more. Randolph's a little older, but they're both in their 70s, pretty much.
Yeah,
like,
they're both full gray. Randolph is a little jowlier than Mortimer, but they're definitely both old.
So there's a legitimately fantastic quote from Eddie Murphy on the press tour for this movie, where the two Duke brothers are Ralph Bellamy and Don Ameche. Ralph Bellamy, prior to this movie, had done 99 acting roles. Don Ameche had done 49. Eddie Murphy had done 2, including this one. So Eddie Murphy would go on the press tour and say, combined, we've done 150 movies. Like, there's so much talent behind this film. And I'm like, Eddie Murphy, I see why you're a star, you know?
Right. Like these two terrible old dudes are like some of the funniest stuff in this movie. They just like the way they deliver these extremely well-written lines is hilarious. And basically what happens here is we get introduced to Dan Aykroyd's character, who is there. He's advising them on some buying and selling. We see what Dan Aykroyd's day consists of, which is also quite ridiculous. He shows up to his office. It seems like he's there for 5 minutes. He looks at some stock prices, makes like one decision, and then closes his briefcase for the day, and then goes to talk to Randolph and Mortimer.
Pork bellies. I knew it. I knew it.
Pork bellies. I knew it. I knew it.
I believe that's all he says during his workday, and he looks at a picture of his fiancée on his desk, and that's about it. And then we see him interact with Randolph and Mortimer, and they have a brief exchange about payroll, and Mortimer's like, we seem to be paying our employees a lot. And Dan Aykroyd's like, you can't get around that old minimum wage.
Fantastic line.
Yeah,
I wrote
great.
that one down because I was like, oh my God, these people are so out of touch and terrible.
Randolph? Mortimer?
Winthorpe, my boy, what have you got for us?
Well, it's that time of the month again. Payroll checks for our employees, which require your signatures. And no forgetting to sign the big ones.
We seem to be paying some of our employees an awful lot of money.
Can't get around the old minimum wage, Mortimer.
I definitely got like a Scrooge vibe from them, especially at this point in the movie, but I think throughout the whole movie.
Oh yeah, there's definitely something like super Dickensian, if I may, about this whole entire movie, because it's really about sort of like getting people to reflect on their own place in life, no matter where it is. It's instead of seeing the consequences of their bad decisions, really, it gets played out in real life by an experiment that only people in this position could actually pull off. And you probably could only pull this off before the age of the internet too. Yeah.
Yeah, Dickensian is a great way to put it, because in that whole first scene, like you said, with that line with the minimum wage, like it starts with, you know, these old stuck-up men greeted by Dan Aykroyd, who's playing the snobbish, you know, rich dude perfectly. And they get together and they're like, it's that time of the month again for payroll. And I'm like, they're literally bleeding money every month and complaining about it. I'm like, there's some weird, like, you know, old school literature concept of, like you said, Dickensianness and like womanhood. Like, they're not talking about periods, but they're talking about like literally, why are we bleeding so much money every month? And I'm like, this script actually works really well on a lot of metaphorical levels.
Right, and so you get the idea. They have this exchange with Dan Aykroyd, and you get the idea that at least maybe Randolph is not super impressed by Dan Aykroyd. He thinks that maybe there's really not much to his role. And I don't know if you want to get into I don't know how much we want to talk about the wager they put together here, but the amount they're betting each other is not revealed till the end of the movie.
Fantastic reveal when it does happen.
Yeah. So, but basically, because Randolph was reading this scientific article about sort of nature, like your basically environment versus genetics is what the article was about, and he makes a bet with his brother that they could just pull someone off the street, and with the right environment, he could do just as good of a job at basically picking stocks and advising them as Dan Aykroyd is doing. And that's sort of the setup for their wager. All they say is, how much do you want to bet? The usual amount, and they shake hands.
Is that before Dan Aykroyd runs into Eddie Murphy outside? I thought...
Oh, yeah. So maybe does one of you want to get into a little bit about Eddie Murphy's awesome introduction and encounter with Dan Aykroyd's character?
Fantastic depiction from the 1980s and also to today. Nobody has any understanding of this scenario, and then the police have no understanding of the scenario, but they side with the dude who's dressed better. I loved when Eddie Murphy's like, oh, I'm sorry, man, here's your briefcase, and tries to hand it to him, and Dan Aykroyd's like, no, please don't kill me, I'm gonna get married. And he's like, help, help, and the cops come over, and they're like, well, clearly one of these people is the bad guy.
Oh, I'm sorry about that, man. Help! What you talking about, man?
Don't shoot. Take it. Please don't kill me. I'm
matter? Hey, I don't want your bag, man. Help!
That's a great scene. I love that. I know we've talked about it on Cinemodities before, and I'm sure we'll talk about Dan Aykroyd more in this episode. Are you guys both aware that Dan Aykroyd is legitimately a crazy person? Have you ever heard about this stuff?
No.
Yeah, I know a little bit about that. So, like, it's like you're talking about the alien stuff, right?
Yes. And so, specifically, my favorite story is that Dan Aykroyd, when a year after this, when he's doing the press tour for Ghostbusters, people are interviewing, Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, everybody for Rick Moranis, everybody from Ghostbusters, and they're like, do you show this movie to your kids? Like, what do they think of it? Now, basically, everyone in the cast is like, yeah, this is good fun. Like, we made a funny movie that's about ghosts, but more about running a business, and it works on all levels for the whole family. And then Dan Aykroyd's like, yes, I show them this movie, and I make sure they understand that ghosts are real, and we need to respect the supernatural. Because Chris mentioned it, Dan Aykroyd has gone on record in, the last 10 years saying that, aliens are here on planet Earth. They're trying to, mate with our women to, control the species and stuff like that. Dan Aykroyd is legitimately an insane person.
But
yeah, I think well, there's that. Yeah, there's that. I think he talks about I think he believes he's encountered the real, honest to goodness Men in Black a few times.
Yes.
Yeah, and then he also has this side hustle where he makes vodka that he sells in crystal skulls, and it's called Crystal Skull Vodka.
I'm glad you bring that up. Have either of you guys ever tried Crystal Skull Vodka?
I have. Yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's vodka.
I thought it tasted like straight cleaning product. I really disliked the Crystal Skull that I tried. But that's Dan Aykroyd. If you buy I love skulls. I think the cinema audience knows I love skulls. I've said to Zach many times, hey, Zach, my birthday and Christmas are coming up. I want an actual human skull and the death certificate of the person it belongs to. And he's like, I'm not getting that close. I'm not touching that one. But I love skulls, so I was attracted to Crystal Skull Vodka. And the glass is cool, but I could not stand the taste of it.
Do you know how many times it's distilled?
I don't.
Filtered? Yeah, that's pretty much the difference between good vodka and bad vodka is how many times they filter it.
Okay.
So
it's also poured over magic crystals. True story.
Maybe Dan Aykroyd's is. Yeah, I from the discussion he probably got from aliens.
Yeah, well, if you ever feel like if you're a little bit masochistic, there's a 3-hour Dan Aykroyd Joe Rogan from last year where you can hear all about that kind of garbage. But
I might have to listen to that just because Dan Aykroyd is such a weird, interesting person. Okay, that was our quick aside on Dan Aykroyd. He's fantastic in this movie and in Ghostbusters, but it's just so weird to think that he has those opinions while you're watching him be this snobbish.
Right. So and so basically, there's this whole encounter with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy. Dan Aykroyd's character accuses him of assault or something like that. Eddie Murphy ends up in jail. The old Duke brothers are exposed to Eddie Murphy's character as an example of and Randolph looks at it as, here's just somebody who's a product of a bad environment. And they set up this wager and they begin sort of sabotaging Dan Aykroyd's life. What's Dan Aykroyd's character's name? I can't remember.
Wilthorpe.
Louis Winthorpe III.
Yeah.
So
right.
I actually really like the scene where Randolph is talking to Eddie Murphy's character, Billy Ray Valentine, and he's just like, you probably had a bad home life, riddled with drugs, and the cops are trying to arrest him, and he's quizzing him about how terrible his childhood was.
The cops know the Duke brothers. They know they're just running the show. So whenever the Dukes are done asking questions, that's when the cops can carry on with their activities. But the interesting thing is Eddie Murphy's character just pretty much agrees with everything that's proposed by Randolph at this point. So he lines himself up to be a perfect participant in this experiment.
What's going to happen to this man?
We're going to book him on assault, attempted robbery, and resisting arrest.
Well done, Winthorpe.
Hey, man, I'm innocent. This guy bumped into me. I was trying to give him his briefcase back to him. Shit, I can't be going to jail because some asswipe ain't watching where he's going.
Officer, I would like to press full charges. People like this are a menace to decent society.
You're from a broken home, of course.
Yeah, we was broke, so what?
You have a history of juvenile arrests, I presume, drug abuse, reform school, state prisons, and all that?
Yeah, I ain't talking to this guy. I want a lawyer. Is there a lawyer in the house?
That man is a product of a poor environment. There's absolutely nothing wrong with him. I can prove it.
Of course there's something wrong with him. He's a Negro. Probably been stealing since he could crawl.
He does follow it up with, "I'm done talking to this old man. Take me to jail," or something like that.
I have to say, one of the I think a little later on, after we get through this movie, I do want to talk about Eddie Murphy, because I think this is the first time he's truly coming up on Cinemoddities. I'm not the biggest Eddie Murphy fan, but one of my favorite scenes in this movie, and probably one of Eddie Murphy's best performances, is the jail cell scene. When he's talking about how he fought off the cops, and he has the great line where he's doing the weird karate stuff and making noises, and he goes, "That's the cord of blood technique. Do that, and a cord of blood comes out the man's body."
I have a chain belt in Kung Fu.
Yes, and the two guys, which I should preface this with, this is how they're credited in the movie. The two guys in the jail cell that challenge him are big black guy and even bigger black guy. That is how they're credited, and they're two football players from the time.
Oh man, that's not appropriate. Neither one of them is significantly bigger than the other. That's one's taller.
One of them is a little bit wider.
Yeah, but the other guy's taller. You can't be like, this guy's bigger.
Yeah.
Fuck off with that.
I love when they're like, "You came in here last night, you were screaming, you said you fought all these cops, how come you don't got any bruises?" And Eddie Murphy's like, "I'm a karate man, we bruise on the inside, we don't show weakness."
I think he literally says that he was personally trained by Bruce Lee.
It's like, this is, since of course this was Eddie Murphy's second movie, I'm just like, this is why he got so popular. America had not seen, the film-going world had not seen somebody this confidently over the top ever before. Not being a stereotype like John Wayne or Humphrey Bogart, where they were just like, "I'm a cowboy and I'm confident." He's just like, "I have no reason to be confident, but I'm going to double down on everything anybody challenges me with." And that's what he plays for the next 3 years. But like I said, I want to get into that later. But I love that scene. Quick also shout out, on the stage left of Eddie Murphy when he's describing things is a very young Giancarlo Esposito, who of course everybody knows now as Gus Fring from Breaking Bad. Or maybe, Chris, you know him as bad guy from Mandalorian Season 1.
Yeah, it's interesting how much noise people make about that, because he's basically not a character in that show. He shows up for he's got maybe 4 minutes total screen time, and
Yep.
he plays Gus Fring basically.
That's my biggest upset is Giancarlo Esposito is doing his own thing in this movie. He actually has a role in the Spike Lee movie. Oh, I'm not remembering exactly, but he's the guy whose shoes get scuffed by Steve Zahn. He's like, "These are my new shoes," and he does this whole bit. And Giancarlo Esposito then plays Gus Fring in Breaking Bad, and he has never played a different role since. Because he plays the same character in The Mandalorian, and he plays the same character in The Boys in seasons 1 and 2.
Yeah, it's not his fault. These Mandalorian jerks are just yeah, do the Gus Fring thing for a few lines exactly, and it'll be popular. And they were right, because market research works.
I think that's the bane of, I think Eddie, talking about Eddie Murphy as a movie star versus today, I don't think we have movie stars. We have people that play a role so well they only get cast to play that role. They get typecast. And Giancarlo Esposito, I don't think anyone will deny, Gus Fring is probably one of the best performances ever given in any motion picture, whether it be TV or movies. And then they were just like, "Yeah, do that." And it's well, I want to see what else he can go for.
Yeah, it's possible he will become an actual character in The Mandalorian, but for anyone who thinks he is now, you're tricking yourself. He is not a character. He's not a character in that series. He is a cardboard standout of Gus Fring.
Yes.
But I didn't notice him at all in this scene in Trading Places. I had no idea he was there. Obviously, this movie is 35 years old or so. So I wouldn't have recognized him. And does he have a line? I didn't notice.
I think he just is basically Eddie Murphy's hype man in that scene where he's like, "Yeah, you tell him," He's like, "That's why I didn't get his phone call." I think that people also forget he's the main detective in The Usual Suspects, which of course everybody remembers is, Kevin Spacey is the bad guy at the end of the movie. Spoiler alert, yeah, if anybody hasn't seen The Usual Suspects. But, Gus Fring is the guy... Gus Fring, Jesus, I even did it. Giancarlo Esposito is the dude who's trailing him and figures out that it is him at the very end of the movie. And everybody's like, nope, I remember him as Gus Fring because he was stoic. And it's like, yeah, it's a great performance, but this dude has way much more to give.
Yeah, so I totally agree, and I hope he becomes a real character on The Mandalorian. Right after that, he's Eddie Murphy's playing himself up to these other guys in jail, and he gets bailed out of jail in the nick of time by none other than the Duke brothers, and they inform him of his. They make him an offer to take this job, and they're going to start him on an amazing salary of $80,000 a year and give him a place to live and all kinds of good stuff. And there's this, they invite him into their limousine, and he thinks it's some kind of practical joke at first. He doesn't understand what's going on.
They hand him 8-10 cigars.
Oh yeah. He starts, they offer him a cigar. He takes a handful out of the whole box. Yeah, and he just doesn't believe what's going on. He thinks in any minute he'll be thrown out of this car, so he's going to take all that stuff. I think he's offered some whiskey too, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, he takes the whole bottle.
Yeah, there's this great moment where he sort of leans forward and asks the limo driver if this is a practical joke, and the guy doesn't give him much of an answer, but indicates that it's for real. And with that, and with one phone call to Winthorpe's butler, these roles begin to switch these two roles for these two men, and there's a little more to Winthorpe's downfall here. I believe he gets some marked bills placed on him in the country club, and they sort of accuse him of stealing $150, which is like
nothing.
That's interesting. It's an interesting amount, but they plant some marked $50 bills in his pocket, and he basically gets accused of a crime, ends up in jail the same day that Eddie Murphy has moved into his former home. So I'm sure you guys have that scene where Eddie Murphy is introduced to his new home is pretty great, huh?
Yeah, so I actually I really enjoyed that scene, specifically like Eddie Murphy's trying the whole time to distract people so he can steal things, and we see at one point he's like, "Oh man, I really love the curtains in my new house."
You guys see the curtains?
He pockets something, and it flips back over to them, and they didn't look. So he just is filling his pockets, trying to distract them the whole time. That was really well done.
Yeah, you can't believe the stereo and the TV are all his. It's like they're giving him a house, which is pretty remarkable. And then he can't believe it so much where he picks up this vase. He's like, "This is my vase. I can do this with it and juggle this vase." And he smashes the vase, and then he's like, "Oh," he gets real serious. He's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that." And Randolph's like, "That's totally fine. That was your vase. In fact, I believe we took out a $50,000 insurance policy on it. So look at that, Mortimer. Valentine has already made us $20,000."
It's such a good, 'cause I'm glad it doesn't last the whole movie, but this whole setup of the fish out of water Eddie Murphy stuff works perfectly, because that's who Eddie Murphy could play. Because his movie before this, I don't think we said, was 48 Hours, where he's just the criminal in the law world. Now he's just the homeless dude in the rich world, and he plays that so well.
Yeah, and after he breaks the vase and they have a good laugh about it, he's like, "Oh, you want me to break something else?" And Randolph and Mortimer's reaction to him asking if he wants to break something else is just it's almost like right out of The Simpsons. They're just like, "No, definitely." I don't know, it's just delivery. It's just so funny, that scene, man. It's fantastic, the juxtaposition of these characters.
The delivery, the timing is perfect. I like the comparison to The Simpsons. No, it's very cartoonish.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially seeing it from these two old men, seeing this much energy come out of them. No, don't quit breaking things.
This is my stuff, my place, huh? I can do what I want with this stuff, right? This is my vase here, right? This is Billy Ray's vase, right? I own this vase, and I can play like Harlem Globetrotter shit with it, right? Okay, you want Mellow Lemon shit, right? Hey, man, I'm sorry about that.
Perfectly all right, William. It was your vase.
That's a cheap vase, man. That was a fake, right?
I think we paid $35,000 for it. But I seem to remember we estimated its value at $50,000 for the insurance company. You see, Mortimer, William has already made us a profit of $15,000.
You want me to break something else?
No.
It's that was definitely well done.
This was on this rewatch when I was like really getting into it, and all these like memories of the movie were coming back to me. I was really trying to think of like, well, what do I think is like my favorite performance, or who do I really love in this movie? And I think I do love everyone. I don't think there's a single performance that falls flat, maybe except the baggage handlers at the end, because one of them is Al Franken, who goes on to be a politician, which, you know, in this day and age, that I'm not a big fan of that. But I think probably my favorite performance in the movie is Denholm Elliott as Coleman, the butler. Like, I love how he's like the one good person in this ring of terrible people.
Yeah, what is it he says about his boss after he hangs up on the phone with him? He calls it something
such a
akin to
scumbag.
a
He's like
scumbag,
such a scumbag. Because he's on the phone and you don't hear the other end of the line. You just hear him going, "Oh, okay. A scientific experiment, sir? Well, it is your house and I work for you. So sure, I'll make the preparations." Hangs up the phone, wipes his hands on his shirt like it's dirty to talk to this person on the phone, and then says, "Such a scumbag." And when he does his whole Irish priest with the whiskey bit on the train later, I love it.
Yeah, and you know, fans of the excellent Indiana Jones trilogy will recognize Mr. Elliot there as Marcus Brody, who shows up in the first and third Indiana Jones as he works at the school that Indy teaches at, and he has a pretty good adventure in the third one. So I mean, it's cool to see him.
I love the third Indiana Jones, but I think his performance in this is better. I think that he's not. I don't want to say he's phoning it in The Last Crusade, but I'm like, he was just kind of, you know, a returning character, and he didn't really own it like he did in this role.
Oh, he has so much more to do in this role. Like, yeah, and especially when he has these great scenes with where Dan Aykroyd, once in a while, Dan Aykroyd will see them across town. He comes up to the door and he has to pretend he doesn't know Dan Aykroyd. Like, that's so good. I must ask you to leave immediately, or I shall have to call the police. It's like saying this straight to the guy's face after you just kicked him out of his own house. Like, that's interesting stuff to do as an actor, I'm sure.
It was definitely, like, when I watched that scene, I was like, that was some ballsy shit.
Yeah.
Like, Baldface lying to this guy. He's like, I have no idea who you are. Like, that's a gutsy character.
I also think he has one of the best punch-up lines in the movie when at the end, well, in the last, like, 40 minutes when they figure out, or Eddie Murphy and Aykroyd figure out what's going on, and Aykroyd's like, "I'm going to shoot these people because they ruined my life." And Eddie Murphy's like, no, that's assault with a deadly weapon. It turns out that, you know, the way to get at rich people is to make them poor people. And Denholm Elliott comes in with 2 more shotguns and goes, "You didn't like it, sir." And I was dying at that little bit. Like, it's so straight. It's that dry wit that works in this movie.
You know, you can't just go run and shoot people in the kneecaps with a double-barrel shotgun because you pissed at them.
Why not?
It's called assault with a deadly weapon. You get 20 years for that shit.
Listen, do you have any better ideas?
Yeah, you know, it occurs to me that the best way you hurt rich people is by turning them into poor people.
I have to admit, sir, you didn't like it yourself a bit.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a good time to just talk for a second about introducing our main female lead here, and there's this great scene where Dan Aykroyd's first let out of jail, and his fiance has come to bail him out, and the Duke brothers have staged a little interaction outside the jail. Do you guys have any opinions on that scene?
Oh, I mean, I think if you read anything about this movie, one of the first things that comes up is that how the studio was so against Jamie Lee Curtis playing this role because she had only done horror movies. But she is great. I have to say, I actually really like Kristen Holby as Penelope Winthorpe better than Jamie Lee Curtis. I almost kind of wish they were switched. But Kristen Holby could not do the prostitute role as well as Jamie Lee Curtis does. And I love the running joke, which I don't even think it's a rule of threes, when Kristen Holby's like, "You're a heroin dealer, Lewis. I don't like that." And he's like, "It's not heroin, it's PCP, and I swear I'm not a dealer." And Jamie Lee Curtis comes up going, "Oh, I need another hit, baby. I'll do all those things you like."
And Penelope's just so indignant about the fact that like overnight he's like learned what PCP is. It's like he now knows the distinction between those two things. Like he's been turned into a garbage person overnight just by being in jail once.
I love the fact that when he gets out of jail, he goes to her and he's like, "Oh, Penelope, thank God, I'm so happy to see you." And she goes, "You're making a scene and you smell."
Darling, I'm so glad to see you.
Louis, you're making a scene.
The good news is I'm innocent. I've never even done anything vaguely resembling this. Really, it's the truth.
You look awful. I'm so ashamed. Those clothes and those shoes and you've been fighting it. And you smell.
I smell? Penelope, do you realize where I've been since yesterday? They beat me up and stole my clothes. Those men wanted to have sex with me.
Is this somewhere else,
One
Louis?
of them tried to bend me over this,
Yeah, and I mean, she definitely gets the impression that he's been lying to her throughout their whole relationship. So she's not wrong really to feel as betrayed as she does. And I mean, she's maybe a little wrong to go run into the arms of Todd. Like, yeah, Todd's kind of a tool.
Well, there's something, and when she finally after this staged drug addict prostitute interaction, I think she runs away on this great line, this great delivery of "I never want to see you again as long as I live," which is just very powerful when it's said that way. It has a lot of weight behind it.
Louis, who is this person?
I've never seen this woman before in my life.
Don't say it. Come on, baby. Just a dime bag. I'll do all those things you like.
You lying, filthy, disgusting creep! Todd was right about you. I never want to see you again as long as I live!
That actually reminds me, it's pretty similar to the line that Dan Aykroyd delivers repeatedly for this kind of few-minute segment, which is like, "I've never seen that insert object in my life."
Yes.
It's like, "I've never seen that money in my life. I've never seen those drugs in my life. I've never seen this woman in my life."
Oh, it's so good that just I love. I think one of the best comedic aspects of this movie is how they legitimately just destroy his life in every way possible.
Well, yeah, in every like kind of recourse he has to deal with his life being destroyed, they shut him off there too. So like he goes to the bank to get out some cash, and they're like, "No, fuck you. Like, we're actually going to take your credit cards too."
It'd be interesting. I think the only thing that the only thing that's like a little bit like that maybe almost hurts the writing a little bit is just Jamie Lee Curtis's character Ophelia is like almost too much of a saint. Like she just bends over backwards to help Winthorpe here, and that's if anything pulls me out of it just the slightest bit. It's just like, oh, what good luck he had to find someone who would just completely support him and get him through this situation, because I don't know if he could have got it together without her presence at all, right? But
so I agree with you that it's really like a stroke of random luck that he would find this character. But I don't know that I agree with the classification of her as a saint, because she mentions multiple times that she's protecting her investment. She is trying to play this situation to earn some amount of money off of his character, and she, for whatever reason, believes his story, which she didn't have to necessarily.
That's how it starts out. But when she starts turning away gentlemen callers in the middle of the night because Winthorpe is crying in bed.
That's true. Yeah, you make a good point there. And she I think she gets naked and crawls in bed with him. And
that's what I'm talking about when I say she's a saint. Like, it's just like, he was ready to leave so she could get some business done, but she shut that down, right?
I do think that's specifically the time she says she's protecting her investment.
Well,
I mean, she might be lying.
Yeah. I think they might have agreed. I think they agreed on like $10,000 or something like that.
She said 5 figures, which $10,000 is the first time you hit 5.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. I think for Jamie Lee Curtis' character, I was definitely like something I didn't remember from my earlier viewings of this movie is where it's like clearly she's a prostitute. The movie sets it up. And then her first big scene with Dan Aykroyd, when they get back to her apartment, she's like, this is my financial plan. I have this much invested in T-bills. And I'm like, oh, wow. I'm like, I love the juxtaposition of all these rich, snobbish people who are using insider trading and, like, you know, cheap ways to get ahead in the industry. And she's like, no, I literally am just being smart about my money. And I love that middle ground between the criminal or the con man of Eddie Murphy, the snobs of the business industry, and, as Dan Aykroyd says, you're a prostitute. And it's like, yeah, but she understands finances. And I love that middle ground in her character.
Right. And she says something like, you know, the only things I have going for me are like my body and my brains.
Yep, but she has that great line where she's like, I got this much invested in T-bills, I figure I can be on my back for 3 more years and I'll be able to retire. And I'm like, that's a very blunt way to view prostitution as a job, but I guess that's how she has to do it.
I mean, at least she doesn't have a pimp.
Yes, I don't do drugs. I don't have a pimp. I work for myself. I get by on my body, my face, and what's up here.
So it just now occurred to me, she's a prostitute without a pimp, and in jail, Eddie Murphy is a pimp without prostitutes.
I couldn't get my bitches from the phone in the limousine.
Yeah, man, that's why he can't get a hold of his bitches. The phone's broken.
And you know, and something this does sort of remind me of that scene in that other John Landis movie you guys discussed, where there's something about where it shows up in the movie and sort of the context where it's very similar to when the nurse in American Werewolf in London lays out her lifestyle and sexual history. It's just sort of placed very similarly, where it's like a lot of exposition to one of the lead characters all at once. I don't know if it's bordering on redundant, but I am starting to appreciate what you're saying about the sort of commentary on it and more of an average person's financial lifestyle, where we're using a fiscally responsible prostitute to stand in for the average Joe in the world watching the movie. But I think there's something fun about that.
I mean, we should be honest. She's a little bit above average.
She has 42K saved up.
She's the everyman for us in the audience, somewhere between the Duke brothers and Eddie Murphy's character.
No, Chris, that's a really good point, though. Speaking of, you know, Jenny Agutter in American Werewolf in London, I don't know if John Landis has a thing for strong women. He has a thing for straightforward women, it seems. Because I think, Ben, because you weren't on that episode, there's a scene where, like, the main love interest literally explains, like, every sexual encounter she's ever had in a scene to our main character. And Zach and I were like, this comes out of nowhere. And here, Jamie Lee Curtis is just like, I'm a prostitute, but I'm financially responsible. Here we go. You got to know this about me.
No, so I was going to mention, like, Rob and I, we've talked about exposition when it kind of comes out of nowhere, but it's targeted at characters that would not need it, or, you know, like in doctor shows where you're just like, you know, they have some kind of fucking abrasion. It's like you would never tell a doctor that. Doctors fucking know that shit. You're a doctor, they're a doctor, everybody knows this. At least here it is strangers. So she's like, by the way, since I'm going to use you for money, this is the situation. And at least that makes it feel not so out of place to me. It's not like a scene ruiner for me.
Oh, definitely. It's good. I like it. It just it reminded me of that other moment in a film by the same director that seemed to be a large talking point on the previous episode, but I think that was just more about just general infatuation with Jenny Agutter, I guess, which is understandable.
Oh yes, Zach and I loved Jenny Agutter hardcore. So I think this has actually been very interesting. I think we're somewhere in the middle of the movie with Chris's plot breakdown. We're kind of half plot breaking down it and discussing it as we go on, which is very nice.
Well, we don't yet doing too much plot breakdown is boring, and I suppose, and to be honest, if you're listening to this and you haven't watched it, like, I go back to my Facebook comment from several months ago, like, rethink your life, turn off this podcast and watch that movie.
Halt everything you're doing.
Yeah.
Okay, where were... so we talked about... So Jamie Lee Curtis shows up. She's great.
She does exposition.
She does the exposition, absolutely. Are we past the first hour? The first hour of this movie is the setup and the switching, or the trading places. And then the movie kind of gets broken down into 20-minute chunks, where the next 20 minutes is they find out what's going on. The next 20 minutes is an SNL sketch where everybody's doing costumes. And the last 20 minutes is a commodity trade floor thriller.
Well, I mean, I don't know how much you guys want to stick to a straight chronological breakdown, but I think there's definitely a lot to say about Billy Ray Valentine's first couple days on the job, where he can't I believe he has a giant house party before he even does his first day of work.
Yes. And they're not his friends; they're freeloaders.
and he is tired of them spilling shit on the stuff that he was just given.
This rug is Persian. It's from Persia, and everybody ignores him.
It's I did like kind of like the commentary. Like he goes from being one of them to one of the rich people so fast. He's just like, you guys got to stop ruining my shit. You're awful. Having you here sucks. Get out of my house.
I think that's like the heart of the movie is that when he's having that transition, when he actually has something possession-wise, because as far as we know, the backstory we get for Eddie Murphy is that he's pretending to be a limbless war veteran.
Yeah,
we have no other info.
In the Viet Cong.
Yeah, yes, I love that line. I was in the Viet Cong, airborne.
Oh man, when he was making up Vietnam stuff to two real Vietnam vets, that is some priceless stuff. Yeah, that was great.
Once again, I was seeing that. I'm like, this is why Eddie Murphy became as goddamn popular as he did. Like, he owns this nonsense. But I think the heart of the movie is in that kind of like 40 to 60 minute mark when Eddie Murphy starts to get protective of the stuff he now has, and Dan Aykroyd starts to realize that poor people are humans.
So the one thing I didn't like about that transition is like Eddie Murphy suddenly had intuition about stock behavior.
Well, no, I think that I understand where you're coming from, but I think that the reason it worked for me in this movie is that when he has his monologue to the Duke brothers about why they shouldn't do whatever they're doing with pork bellies, it's because he can relate it to people of his class.
Right.
And I think that's where this movie tries to work on that level. I agree with you, though, that the transition for both Aykroyd and Murphy is a little quick. That's just because the movie has to get to 40 minutes of an SNL sketch and a stock trading floor.
Sure, and that's fair. I mean, you can't spend all that much time going through the breakdowns. But I think, they could have even done like a little time skip and it would have felt a little better. But it's all within like the same like 1 or 2 weeks.
Yeah. Well, I think that this gets bolstered, and the reason it worked for me more is because we get the John Landis has his actor spike the camera when one of the Duke brothers excruciatingly, painfully describes to Eddie Murphy what a BLT is. And Eddie Murphy looks directly at the camera. And I'm like, that's, I think, John Landis going, he's not an idiot. They think he's an idiot, but he's not. And that leads into that scene where he understands the market a little more.
Sure, okay. All right, yeah, I feel you on that. That was pretty great for the audience, people who haven't seen it. He says something like, pork belly, it's what they make bacon out of, which you can find on a bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwich.
Yes, and Eddie Murphy looks right at the camera, spikes that damn camera. The only other scene in the movie where we have someone spike the camera is the Duke brother, who says, like, he's a Negro, and he spikes the camera, like, in that scene. And I'm like, John Landis, this doesn't age well.
Well, it's a depiction of two guys who are basically Mr. Burns' contemporaries in real life. Like,
yes.
Like, both them and Mr. Burns would be long dead in the present day. Like, these are characters of a certain time. And it's like a rich guy it's a rich old guy pre-internet. and it's probably quite realistic for the era and the part of society it's trying to depict. And there's a lot of stuff that, like, and I mean, you guys maybe it's a good time to sort of get into like just generally this stuff that may or may not age well.
Sure.
And for me, like I was looking into, did a little bit of research before we started, because I'm like, surely it's 2020, so there must be like 50,000 essays on why this movie is problematic by this point, right? Mm-hmm. And I was like, IMDb or Wikipedia. Wikipedia loves to have a tab about the current perception of the movie and controversies and late essays that have recently been written about it. And I was pleasantly surprised to see that enough people with credibility and bona fides when it comes to discussing cinema have come out and pointed out that the social commentary is so strong and on point, especially for the time period, that that kind of stuff is really like, you're sort of, if you're, it seems like the general consensus among film critics and even up to the current times is that if you're focusing in on that stuff, you're kind of missing the greater positive point of the entire movie. And I saw maybe there was something like recently, like Sky TV in the UK put like a warning on at the beginning of it saying that it had outdated cultural values, which that's fine. Even Seinfeld has that warning here in Canada. I don't know about over there, but there wasn't a lot of talk about editing stuff. I think, for me, and we don't need to get too deep into it. Some of the stuff where I was sort of like, whoa, that doesn't age well, is not even the stuff that's most written about. Like the scene in the near the beginning where Eddie Murphy is running through that place with the briefcase. I had a bit of a cringe when like 20 cops aimed guns at his face. They took him away pretty quick, but like stuff like that where it's not the stuff people automatically go to. Like the eventually there is as you guys have already alluded to, eventually there is a blackface scene in this movie near the end with Dan Aykroyd. And for me, when I think back on this movie, like, I don't know, that it's definitely not like a super standout scene. It's almost a shame that it's there because you structurally would miss something from the movie. I'm not sure if it's edited out of TV versions. I wouldn't be surprised these days, but structurally you'd be missing something if they lost it. But that particular detail is not super relevant to any plot point. It's like, why did you have to go and do that? Because it wouldn't suffer that much if that one detail was changed. But if you lose the whole scene, it's kind of probably jarring.
Yeah, I think the whole point of Dan Aykroyd in that scene is that he's the one who has to switch out the crop report and then reverse switch the briefcase back for the, proper crop report. Because even whether or not the Dukes get the crop report from Clarence Beeks still has to deliver the correct crop report in the context of the movie. So there is a point to that, I think. And at the same time, I was fine with it because Dan Aykroyd was... Maybe the movie could have switched something up. They could have switched out Dan Aykroyd for somebody else. But
well, the point is a costume. So, like, it could be a costume.
Well, at the same time, I feel like in the 80s, I'm trying to put on my 80s hat, which I wasn't alive for, of course. But
right, it's hard.
Clarence Beeks knows Dan Aykroyd from the beginning of the movie.
I was gonna say. Yeah, he knows. He like points him out to other people. He knows who he is.
Right.
So the blackface was definitely like a masking attempt for his face.
Yes.
Which, I mean, like you could go like sunglasses and fake mustache or something.
Yeah.
There are other things you could do, but I would have trouble buying that he didn't see through them.
Well, I mean, it's not as if he convincingly changes his ethnicity per se.
Yeah,
but, I mean, he doesn't look much like Dan Aykroyd anymore.
Well, Ben, I think what I got from this scene on rewatching it for this recording is something that we talked about back in the high anxiety episode. It's not so much your costume, but how loud and obnoxious you're acting. And when Dan Aykroyd comes in as the Rastafarian, and he apparently knows Eddie Murphy's, like, Kenyan exchange student or whatever, they're just going hard and yelling at each other. And that's more of the distraction than the actual costume is.
Right. They don't leave a window for Beeks to say or think anything. I think that's what's good. It's just filling up the dead air so that he doesn't ask any questions, I suppose. And it's effective in that sense. But I don't know if I couldn't find a lot of examples of people really trying to do teardowns of this movie in contemporary times. I don't know about you guys.
No, I'm glad you bring that up. This is something I wanted to talk about. I have found some reports, like you said, going through Wikipedia and their linked pages or just reading about this movie that, they say, oh man, there's blackface, there's, racially insensitive uses of Negro and the N-word. But I actually found some articles of people saying this was a movie of the early 1980s. They don't use the N-word offensively. The one time we get the N-word is when the Duke brother says it, and he's like, I'm not going to let a beep run the family company. And it's like, that's a perfect use of that word for that time or today to show that he's truly a villain. I think that word was actually used well in terms of character development, that he says, how could you ever let this black person run our company? And the other brother goes, no, you're misunderstanding me. We should keep him on for his usefulness and the optics of it, but we're always going to run this company. Like, it really shows that they're villains, and I was surprised to find articles that reflected that, because that's how I feel about that scene in the movie. I mean, you talk about Tarantino. Zach and I talked about a movie called Death Kiss, where they use the N-word just to be blatant. This is an appropriate use of a racial derogatory term to express how bad and out of touch these people actually are, and that's how I feel.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to see some actual nuanced looks back at the movie, and just as a whole piece, because obviously the message is, it's a great message that a person's capability is a lot more about what they have between their ears and the content of their character per se, right? Mm-hmm. So you can't really, you're sort of missing the point if you hone in on those things, and it's almost like the idea that the villains of a film are supposed to uphold any sort of moral standard whatsoever has always been an amusing concept to me. Like, if you see bad behavior exemplified by someone you're actually supposed to hate in a work of fiction, the idea of trying to impose modern norms on that makes no sense at all. And you see it all the time.
I think, Zach and I have said this a lot on this podcast, and I think, Ben, you agree with this concept, is that, I really dislike applying morals and concepts of today to things that are not made today.
Definitely.
You can apply those things, but that's you have to remember that is not what the state of the world was when that movie was filmed, created, released, edited, all that stuff.
That's exactly right. And yeah, you can't judge by the past by the morals of today. If we weren't getting better, then we should stop existing as a species.
Well,
to look back and say something like, "Oh, this was bad," it's like, well, fucking, I hope so. Well, I hope things in the past
we've learned, yeah.
Well, not only that though, but I feel like there's more poignant and thoughtful commentary in this movie than I know Zach loves to say everything in the last 10 years is terrible. Is pretty much his attitude, right? But
Zach is a 60-year-old in a 30-year-old's body, yeah.
right. But this is a comedy from 1983, and I can honestly tell you, I feel like there was more going on there's more going on intellectually here than a lot of the stuff I've seen, because this is almost like presented to us as a sort of window of something that could into something that could actually happen. These are real types of characters, right? I feel like something that happens in current media a lot is, because of everyone's ability to chime in, and because they know that thousands of people are going to express their opinion on Twitter and tag them, the studios and the writers and the directors, the next day after something gets released, there's the second layer of presentation that goes on with a lot of current media, where it's like, let's figure out what we're trying to say with the film, and then on the second layer, we're going to try and preemptively protect ourselves from the cavalcade of criticism that's going to come afterwards. Whereas back then, it was almost like you heard what the film critics said, not what every idiot said about a movie, right? So I think it's just that reactionary protectionism type of perspective just does a lot to just make things. It just softens the point on everything that comes out now, and I feel like this. I've seen this movie before a bunch of times, but it made me sort of reflect on stuff in a way that I couldn't tell you the most recent movie that made me actually think about society and culture actually has. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think if, like you said, if somebody is focusing in on this movie on the racial insensitivity, then they're missing the point of classism and rich people controlling the poor people, and what, circumstances, the nature versus nurture, like we were saying. And that's more of the idea of this movie, which I give that's why I think I have a lot of respect for it. And it's interesting that they can do that and keep it funny at the same time.
Yep, and it's like if you couldn't tell, you're not supposed to like the Duke brothers.
They are villains through and through. So just to go back to something you said, Chris, about you were unsure about what gets censored or not in this movie on TV broadcasts. I looked into this as well. From everything I found, you're exactly right that when this movie plays in America, North America, any place like that, they put that disclaimer at the beginning. Apparently, though, there is one line that gets cut out, has been cut out in every single TV broadcast of this film since 9/11. And it's when Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy are walking into the World Trade Center commodities trading floor, and Dan Aykroyd gives his great monologue where he's like, nothing, no carnage or anything has prepared you for what you will witness on this trading floor. The very end of this monologue, as they're walking into the World Trade Center, he goes, in this building, it's either kill or be killed. And after 9/11, they have cut that line out of every airing of this movie.
That seems appropriate.
Think big. Think positive. Never show any sign of weakness. Always go for the throat. Buy low, sell high. Fear, that's the other guy's problem. Nothing you have ever experienced can prepare you for the unbridled carnage you're about to witness. Right. Super Bowl, the World Series, they don't know what pressure is. In this building, it's either kill or be killed. Right. You make no friends in the pits and you take no prisoners. 1 minute, you're up $500,000 in soybeans, and the next, boom, your kids don't go to college and they've repossessed your Bentley. Are you with me?
Yeah, but we gotta kill him, motherfucker! We gotta kill him!
9/11, a Cinemodities topic. I was about to say Cinemodities favorite. It's a favorite topic. We don't love 9/11. But it comes into play once again.
I feel compelled to restrain on commenting on 9/11 as a Canadian. I don't know. I don't know if it's safe. I haven't researched this well enough, so
okay.
Abstain.
That's fair.
Yeah, that is really surprising to me that that's the only line that's ever been cut out. But I know there was a solid, and I know there was a good phase of just any reference to the World Trade Center being cut out of things for a while there afterwards. Like,
yes. Yeah. Ben and I talked about it in our Chasing Amy episode. There's a shot of the Twin Towers, and we're like, Kevin Smith sucks. He didn't edit this out after 9/11. As a total joke. I think just so the cinema audience remembers, and my co-hosts, I was in New York for 9/11. I remember dealing with all of that. And tune in next year for Cinemodities. There's going to be a lot of episodes about movies that led up to 9/11, how that changed the cinema landscape. So, spoiler alert. So speaking of TV airings, something else I wanted to mention. I did not know this until researching this movie. I found it first as an IMDb fact, which you can take with a grain of salt, because, they're a lot looser than Wikipedia. But it apparently turns out to be true. Every year since 1997... there's a channel in Italy that plays this on Christmas Eve. And it gets a lot of views. Like, it gets something like 15 to 20% network share every Christmas Eve in Italy. So Italy loves this movie, apparently.
Do you have any insight as to why?
My best guess is that Dan Aykroyd drunkenly dresses up as the dirty Santa and shoves shrimp into his pockets. That might be the best Christmas scene I've ever watched in a movie.
Oh my God, the drunk Santa stuff is some of the finest stuff in this whole movie. Just like how he looks, whatever the makeup process was, just like pulling food out of the dirty Santa jacket.
When he's eating it along with his beard. Yes.
It's consuming so much hair, and those, like, they do like the back and forth with those ladies. They're just like looking at him kind of grossed out, and they see him pulling air out of his mouth, and they're like,
oh man, and he's ready to kill himself, but the gun doesn't work in the rain or something, and it's just like it's interesting because it's sort of like growing up in a rough environment, sort of inoculated Billy Ray Valentine from being absolutely destroyed to the point of wanting to kill himself. But Winthorpe was not ready for the turn of events that befell him, and he was ready to call it quits, but his life had fallen apart so much that he couldn't even pull that off successfully.
Yeah, so the one problem I had with that scene is that he throws the gun and it fires after the fact, and like my thought on it is like those guns are way more reliable than that. Like,
but like that is some seriously funny shit when he throws it and it fires though.
I don't disagree. And when I said, I should clarify, like when I said I didn't have any problems with this, I think that it was the depiction of him ready to kill himself is good movie making. Like we get insight into how his character is handling the situation. As Chris already said, he could not handle it. He was not prepared the way that Eddie Murphy was.
Yeah. That's that screwball comedy type stuff where the gun doesn't fire and then he throws it and you hear like it fire and a cat screech or whatever, glass break in the back. Like that's total screwball stuff.
Well, I think that's kind of an interesting parallel to how how quickly Billy Ray Valentine starts judging his former cohorts as being freeloading lowlifes. It's almost like just showing just how frail the human psyche actually is. Like, he can be turned around, do a serious 180 character adjustment in a matter of days. And it's almost the same thing with Winthorpe, where like he feels so out of control that he doesn't even want to live. It's almost like there's so little so much of the continuity of your personality is reliant on these constants in your life.
It's kind of interesting. Like, this movie obviously came out way before this happened, but in 2008, when the housing market bubble crashed, and we had a lot of people like dropping from middle class into lower class. Like, I think the commentary this movie makes on not only how fragile the psyche is, but on how fragile the class system is, and the class that you're a part of is. Yep. Like, how fragile your social identity is definitely kind of exemplified in this movie well before its time, in terms of that particular instance I mentioned.
I think that's why this movie works as such a social commentary. Like we were saying, ignore the possibly racially insensitive stuff. This movie at its heart is a social commentary, exemplified by the fact that the prime concept of the movie is a social experiment. Like, not a real experiment, but just some life-ruining aspect that gets carried out by two rich old white men.
I definitely found that it's an interesting plot device, and they kind of like wrapped the whole movie around the idea of like this nature versus nurture argument that they introduced really early on.
Yeah.
It just kind of struck me as like it's not often that you see movies that are made about philosophical questions.
Yep. I think that's something once we get to it, because I mentioned a few times when we talk about Eddie Murphy's career. Eddie Murphy does not usually make existential films. His movies are like, I'm family man that has to host daddy daycare. That's not an existential film. This is very much a high concept film. I mean, Eddie Murphy in Daddy Daycare has to act like he's seeing a lot of shit on the floor of his house's bathroom because a kid couldn't use the toilet, and then has to look at the ceiling to imply that there's shit on the ceiling as well. That's a big change from this movie.
I feel like, Rob, I get the sense that there's a good 10 years after this movie came out, at least before Daddy Daycare, with some quality material in there. but
yeah,
I think
you're skipping a lot to get to Daddy
you're thinking
Daycare.
back to the first stuff you were alive to witness in theaters, perhaps. But I don't know. But
I mean, you did skip him talking to animals.
Well, that might be after that. I'm not sure, but but
no,
like,
that's actually before Daddy Daycare.
For sure.
Okay, but and also before Adventures of Pluto Nash, another perennial classic. But
well, oh my God, I could do a whole episode on Eddie Murphy's 2002, in which he releases 3 box office bombs. You got Showtime with Robert De Niro, Adventures of Pluto Nash, and I Spy with Owen Wilson. 3 movies that fail spectacularly, and then he comes back with critical acclaim in Dreamgirls. Eddie Murphy's a fucking insane career path.
Well, and then, I mean, but, like, there's a lot of good stuff in the 80s, though. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff in Beverly Hills Cop that's really funny. Coming to America is also good.
Okay, quick spoiler alert. In about 3-4 months from now, we are gonna do an episode on Beverly Hills Cop. That is one of my least favorite movies of all time, but I want to save why I hate that movie so much, and Eddie Murphy is a big reason for it. I will say one thing,
Interesting.
Bum 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 bum.
Like, where would we be as a culture without that melody? That's all. What else can you say?
Well, as Ben knows from our Under the Silver Lake discussion, that was written by the songwriter. Everybody, tune in like 3-4 months from now. We are gonna do a Martin Brest finishing up his movies. We're gonna do Beverly Hills Cop, and I'm going to finally give my diatribe on why that is one of the worst films of all time and why it ruined human film culture. Because that movie was a massive success, and I hate that fact.
Rob is not amused by the act of putting a banana in a car's tailpipe.
Oh my
He's
God,
not at all.
Movie. See, you're pushing my buttons, Chris. You're making me want to talk about that movie. Everybody, next year, 2021.
Some of the great comedic timing and delivery that Eddie Murphy first shows off in Trading Places does occur throughout the rest of the 80s, and it wasn't it's not as if he went straight from this to Daddy Daycare. That's all I was trying to say.
Yes. I mean, of course, he does his foray into family films. I mean, he does Nutty Professor in 1996, which I don't dislike. I hate the fact that people call that an Eddie Murphy movie. It's a fucking remake of the Jerry Lewis movie, which is fundamentally better from the 60s, because Jerry Lewis was one of the first true comedians. But then he does, Mulan, Dr. Dolittle, Shrek, those family-friendly things. Like I said, he has that terrible 2002. Even though I have to say, Adventures of Pluto Nash, we will have to discuss that one day. That's one of those movies that's so fucking obscure, it is beautiful. Like, that movie makes no sense. It's so weird. You got, his upswing with Dreamgirls, but then he follows it up with Norbit, which is the most ridiculous thing ever to be on screen, and then more kids' films. And then 2019, he does Rudy Ray Moore in Dolomite Is My Name, which is probably the best biopic of, the last 10 years. And so Eddie Murphy is just on a roller coaster ride of, do I do good dramatic roles or do shitty kids movies? Ben, do you know anything about Rudy Ray Moore?
I don't know anything about most of the stuff you just said.
Awesome. We're not only disenfranchising the listeners, we're disenfranchising my co-hosts.
I think that I saw Norbit at a drive-in theater when I was a kid.
Oh, Norbit is ridiculous. The best part about Norbit is that Eddie Murphy plays Norbit, a skinny dude. Norbit's wife, Respucia, who's a morbidly obese woman that has to keep breaking her car seat because she gets fatter and fatter and can't fit in the car. So she has to literally break the treads the car seat is on to fit in the car. And he plays an Asian orphan owner. I'm pretty sure the Asian man is the orphanage owner.
So that's early 2000s, right? That almost
I think it was 2006 or 7, Norbit, yeah.
Yeah, that almost sounds like it would age more poorly than Trading Places to the contemporary eye, which is really impressive considering it came out 25 years later.
That's a good point.
That's a good point.
Yeah, because Eddie Murphy is literally playing an Asian man who adopted 2 black children and they fall in love. But the best part about that movie, for some reason, Norbit is burned into my memory. I only saw it 2 or 3 times, but I remembered it for how ridiculous it was. The best part of that movie is Norbit is married to Respucia basically because Respucia's brothers forced him into it. And one of Respucia's brothers is Terry Crews, and Terry Crews is fantastic in that movie. He's playing a meathead enforcer, and it's Terry Crews is always a sentimental meathead or a smart meathead. This is the only time he played just a straight, fucking moron, and it works so well. Because Terry Crews is a great person, but this is the only time he played a loser and an idiot, and it really works. Both of you and our audience should watch every Rudy Ray Moore movie, and then watch Dolomite Is My Name, the biopic with Eddie Murphy. Rudy Ray Moore is the peak blaxploitation 70s filmmaker, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I've really I'm peripherally aware of that. I haven't checked out the new Eddie Murphy movie yet. It's just one of those things where it's I know when everyone is saying that it's good, that I should be a little bit skeptical. That's all it is.
That's fair. That's fair. I think Ben and I have both been in that boat for sure. For sure.
But I feel better now that you're saying it though. I put some weight behind that.
I honestly think it's Eddie Murphy's return, because Rudy Ray Moore, if you watch any Rudy Ray Moore movie, he is a classic independent blaxploitation filmmaker that doesn't know what he's doing. So they're the movies that are so bad they're good, but they're from the 70s and 80s that you're just wow, this is fun. He just wanted a scene where he has 8 naked women around him and gets to bitch slap them. That's where the fun in those movies are. And then Eddie Murphy owns that in the biopic about his filmmaking, where they're owning all the bad filmmaking aspects, and it works so well as a biopic.
Sounds pretty good. It sounds like they didn't sort of clean up the retrospective view of what actually happened, which is nice.
Yes. One of my favorite Rudy Ray Moore movie is called Petey Wheatstraw, in which he plays the character Petey Wheatstraw, who dies, makes a deal with the devil to come back to life while stealing the devil's staff that gives him powers. That's how bad this shit is. And he uses his powers to sleep with women and, steal cars and stuff like that. And it's just fantastic.
That'd be amazing if he didn't learn any moral lessons through all of that activity.
I think the final act of Petey Wheatstraw is he has to fight the devil, and they have like, you know, they call each other jive turkeys and have a dance off. Like that's how fucking in your face these blaxploitation movies are.
And is it like a classic, like cartoonish looking like red man with horns?
Oh yeah. Yep,
Wow.
He's got a fro with horns and like a badly painted on third eye. Like it's
Very nice.
fantastic. We might have to do a Rudy Ray Moore series just so I can say there's one scene where he like is sleeping with a woman and the woman turns out to be like a demon or something and he goes, "Bitch, are you for real?" And it's one of the greatest lines of delivery ever. And I would just say that like 2 hours straight on an episode.
I feel like a series might be a little rough on you guys. I feel like watching one of them and then having the plot synopsis of 3 or 4 or 5 of them would probably get the point across. but because you know it's probably a lot of the same type of stuff in the middle, but just different character names and stuff like that. But it's interesting as a concept, though. Yeah.
Bitch, are you for real? Okay, that was a great Eddie Murphy tangent. I'm glad I got that in there for sure. Oh goddamn Eddie Murphy! Where were we in the movie? Have we gotten to the stock trading, commodity trading floor yet?
Well, you talking about the 20-minute segments, so
oh sure.
We haven't. I don't think we've actually talked about any of the 20-minute segments. We definitely haven't talked about the train stuff very much.
Oh, the train segment that is a Saturday Night Live sketch.
Yes, yeah, we haven't talked about that.
So I don't know if you read this, Chris, if you're doing any research, but the reason that they have the whole awkward scene where Coleman is like, "So you're from Australia or Austria, Jamie Lee Curtis?" She goes, "No, I'm Inga from Sweden." It's because she couldn't do an Austrian accent. Like John Landis was so upset by her Austrian accent, they were like, "What can you do? Let's just film this."
Wow.
That's convenient that the costume was close enough that uncultured people will not question it. It worked out nicely. I never would have thought there was anything there.
I love the fact that Coleman calls it. He's like, "But you're wearing lederhosen,"
Yeah.
and she's like, "Let me show my titties."
Well, I mean that almost works perfectly because it's like, isn't it funny that a prostitute pretending to be someone from Europe doesn't quite have the accent right? Like, doesn't that almost fit the character better?
Sure.
Yeah. That's the wrong European country. You're so uncultured.
That's actually a good point because I feel like in movies of today or more contemporary movies, if you had a prostitute character, it would be set up by the prostitute going, "I want to be an actress, but I can't, so I'm a prostitute." She never says that. And it would make sense in contemporary movies where it's like, "I want to be an actress. I can do all these kooky accents." But that's never set up. It's just that they literally had to deal with that on set, which I appreciate.
Yeah, well, and also it's just when people are incompetent, it's funny, and that's like one of the strongest tenets of humor. It's just people being inept at the situation they're currently in. That's just one of the funniest things you can ever do. So that's just added. It's almost like a detail of the production added another layer onto it. That's great.
What do we think about Eddie Murphy's, I think Kenyan, I don't write it down or remember exactly, his little hand brush doing the chanting and stuff? What do we think about that in general?
I'm so uncultured that I'm not sure if that is it comparable to like when he's pretending to be a Vietnam vet where he's just like completely making stuff up. Like, I don't know.
It felt to me like he was trying to shoo away bad spirits. It felt like he was like trying to play off of this idea of these people having like, I don't know, like outworldly beliefs about devil spirits or something.
Okay.
I didn't really get a sense of whether it was supposed to be like a genuine, imitation of a real thing, or if he was just like, they'll believe this nonsense, if I'm just moving around a bunch.
Yeah, I think I'm with you guys. I'm uncultured enough to know if that little hand broom slapping it over the shoulders and sides is an actual thing. I've never seen that anywhere but this movie. But I think the movie doesn't dwell on that. The movie pretty quickly, establishes him doing that and then cuts to, "Do you want the jerkied beef?" And he's offering beef jerky to Clarence Beeks, and that becomes more of his shtick than anything.
Yeah, no, it's like the characters are all pretty good. It's a fun scene. We didn't really talk much about the character of Beeks, which is like he's kind of like this he's like a private investigator, basically, right? That the Duke brothers are using to sort of push all the pawns around in the game here.
Yeah, he has some like governmental security job, but he's also being like freelanced by the Duke brothers for their insider trading stuff. I have to bring up, this fucking blew my mind. Apparently, before it went to Paul Gleason, who's best known as cracking heads in The Breakfast Club, that's his other well-known role, they offered this part of Clarence Beeks to G. Gordon Liddy. And at this point in time, G. Gordon Liddy was not selling gold on commercials. G. Gordon Liddy was the middleman between Richard Nixon and the people that committed the Watergate wiretappings. Like, they literally offered this part to a corrupt government official.
What could have been?
Was that just like a typecasting situation? It's like you seemed like...
I think this was John Landis being like, you know, I don't care if I've killed children at this point. I want to own this fact that I'm casting a corrupt government official in a corrupt government official role.
Thank you for making that connection. That I would have just pointed that out too. It's just like, you know, surround yourself with other people who you also would not like to be judged for their real world activities.
Yeah, because G. Gordon Liddy in the trials for Watergate was basically like, I was following orders, and they were like, the Nazis said that too, you fucking weirdo. Dude, John Landis is a crazy filmmaker. I love whenever we get to talk about his movies.
but I mean, isn't this just a I love many of his films, but like, isn't this just a crazy comeback movie from a career hit, like accidentally killing people? Like, it's really funny. It might be my favorite of all his movies. Like, I don't like, it's, you know what I mean? Like, it's, you don't expect something like that after such an ordeal, but
absolutely. No, I would agree with you there. This is gotta be my favorite John Landis movie, even though, you know, American Werewolf in London I thoroughly enjoyed. But I mean, you know, I've never been a big Blues Brothers fan. I've never been like a big Spies Like Us fan. He has his parts in other things, but he kind of falls off after a lot of, you know, the movies that came after the Twilight Zone phenomenon. I'm also not a very big Coming to America fan, another Eddie Murphy joint. I thought that was always a little too on the nose, I guess, for the stereotypes that they played up in that film. I wish he did more stuff with Dan Aykroyd, because after this, Dan Aykroyd did Ghostbusters, and then he kind of went off into his own thing that turned into Nothing But Trouble, which is just a nightmare of a movie, but fantastic at the same time. Check out our Cinemodities episode about that, where Dan Aykroyd, because Ben, I don't think you know this, Dan Aykroyd did basically everything in a movie in the early 90s called Nothing But Trouble, and he plays a judge that is hundreds of years old whose nose is a prosthetic penis. That's literally that a big part of that movie is that idea.
I'm right with you there. I also controversially not crazy about Blues Brothers. I can hear the police coming for me now just for saying that. But and also I'd even go farther to say, like, this is probably my favorite Dan Aykroyd and my favorite Eddie Murphy movie. Like, I don't get what the deal with Ghostbusters is. Like, it's all right. I don't know how it's inspired religious zealotism on the level of Star Wars among some people. I don't get it. It's good. I don't see how it has that lasting appeal that seems to, like, it's like, you guys might be peripherally aware that there's like cosplay groups for Star Wars called the 501st, where these guys dress up in like perfect stormtrooper armor, and they have rules.
I'm friends with Force Ghost Jim on Facebook.
Right? Yeah, we got.
Hey, it's actually his birthday at the day we're recording this. Happy birthday, Force Ghost Jim!
Great point. Happy birthday, Jim. But so, like, those guys have these strict rule books and stuff. There's the same thing for Ghostbusters. They have like groups where they like do like the perfect proton packs and show up at conventions and all that. And I just fail to see how those two films are compelling enough to drive one to do such a thing.
Actually, Chris, I'm so glad you bring this up. Ben, you and I had this discussion on one of our last, I think, Patreon episodes about how nobody wanted the Ghostbusters 2016 reboot. And I expressed to you, I'm like, because they missed the fact that Ghostbusters, the original, 1984, It is first a movie about starting a business, second about ghost busting. And Ben was like, really? And I'm like, yeah, like ghost busting is almost the C plot of that film. Like,
Right,
it's
and
about them starting a business after they get fired from their teaching jobs.
Right, and the jokes about their financial status and the banter between Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd about running the business. That's the funny stuff in that first movie. The second one I can totally leave. I don't care about the second movie that much.
See, that's where I have a hot take. I love the second Ghostbusters.
Oh, well, I'm just, but
like that's Harold Ramis's acting masterpiece. I think is the second Ghostbusters.
that part might be true, but you know, but like if I think of why I think Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy are awesome, I come back to this movie. Like it's just like there's so much going on in here. There's so much for everyone involved to do.
Yeah.
Both of them are they're forced into like you just see such a spectrum from both of them because of the way the script sort of plants both their characters, and it's just I don't know, it's just a unique piece. You don't see a lot of stuff like this. I find a hard time. Like there's a lot. It's like you could say it's a trope, the sort of role reversal thing, like what you thought this movie was going to be when you heard the title, but that's all that stuff is garbage compared to this movie. Like absolutely.
I have to agree. Every movie that I've seen that fits, like I expected this to be kind of bad as a result of that impression, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Right on. I think that brings us, because I think the last big set piece of the movie, which I really want to talk about, which I think is one of the most fantastic scenes in cinematic history, is the commodity trading floor. Like I said at the start of this conversation, when I was younger, I had no goddamn idea what was going on when everybody was screaming. And I'm so glad that, I had like a finance class explain it to me and really break it down, and I understand it now. But just one of the things, like we said at the beginning, this movie was a huge success. I actually don't think I mentioned it at the start, but they made this movie for $15 million, and it made $90 million.
Dang.
Like, this was a huge hit, like fourth highest grossing film of 1983. That's insane when you look at how the last 20 minutes of the movie is almost incomprehensible. Like, sure, the audience understands that the bad guys lose money, the good guys get money, but I don't think commonplace audiences that were seeing this movie in the 1983 understood what they were doing with buying and selling futures.
Well, I'm personally glad that this stuff comes near the end of the movie, because if it was front loaded with a lot of this terminology and actually having to see the trading floor, it's so unrelatable to young people right now. It
Yes.
looks practically like the Stone Ages with these guys yelling and waving papers around and screaming at each other. Like it's so out of touch with the way, especially if you look at it in our current cultural predicament. Just seeing that many people close to each other is a strange sight by today's standards.
They are packed in that trading floor like fucking kids on a hot day at a community pool in a cartoon.
Right.
Like that is what that scene looks like to me.
There's no less efficient way to communicate what you're a transaction. But it's great that it comes near the end, because there's so much like to appreciate in the first half that anybody will be totally bought in by the time we get here, and it's not going to throw them off in some weird way. Like I know, Ben, you were saying when stuff looks old, you almost it's dumb on some level, but you just can't help be off put by stuff that looks like it's aged really badly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I think there's a lot of people who can't get over it at all, and it's a shame. But it's great that this sort of comes that much later in the movie, that they're already sort of bought in.
I am one of those people that like generally can't get over it at all. This movie. I don't. There's something about like the image quality and like the way things were done back then. It's just like when you can, like you said, when you can tell it's aged poorly, I check out pretty fast. This movie didn't do that to me, and it's probably for the exact reason you mentioned. Although I think that I actually have an introduction to the trading floor from a movie called Jungle to Jungle. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this.
Oh my god! This might be the best Cinemodities pull ever, that you're going to talk Jungle to Jungle trading floor right now. Ben, nobody remembers that scene.
I remember the movie, I don't remember that scene.
I like that's so whenever I saw the trading floor, I was like, this is old hat to me, man. Like I watched Jungle to Jungle like crazy when I was a kid.
Please, Ben, explain that scene, because I can tell you,
my God.
Okay,
nobody remembers that scene. You are doing the deepest cut right now.
Right before you explain it, it's like he sees the World Trade Center trading floor, and with all the people squabbling, he's like, I know what that is. I've seen Jungle to Jungle. That's amazing. Oh,
that is hardcore going in the show notes of this episode. Does Ben remember this movie? No, but he knows Jungle to Jungle.
So, I mean, so what I remember of the trading floor scene of Jungle to Jungle is that this kid who's like taken from the the wild, some tribe, is like checking out life in the city with the guy who is his biological father.
I think it's Tim Allen, right?
It is Tim Allen.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
it's Tim Allen. And he, as part of his bringing up, he's proficient with a blow dart gun thing. And so my memory of that scene is that he is trying to kill an insect of some kind, maybe a fly, with a blow dart. And like he's doing this on the trading floor, and I don't remember too much more than that. But that's definitely, I don't know. It stuck out in my mind, at least, that like people grouped together waving shit at each other.
That's right. That's how alien this environment looks to you. That your only cultural point of reference is I think 1996 Tim Allen movie, something in that ballpark.
Yeah, I mean,
1997. Good guess. Yeah.
I think my only disagreement with you, Ben, I think it's a spider instead of a fly. But I'm so glad you pulled that up, because I did not remember that at all. I think the last time I saw that movie was on VHS when I was 7 years old.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, so I just looked it up on Wikipedia. It was a fly.
Okay.
But when he hits the fly, he also, I think, shoots Tim Allen's boss.
Oh.
It's like that's, and apparently it's a poison dart because it puts the guy to sleep. So that's
tune in next week when we discuss Jungle to Jungle, the commodities trading floor thriller.
And what else can we talk about to like enrage Zach that he didn't show up this episode? Just so he couldn't shut down that conversation like 5 minutes ago.
Oh my God! Yes, I have a list that I keep of all the things that Zach doesn't like when I bring up. I could just run through that.
Let's do the deep critical analysis of Jungle to Jungle next week.
Yes. Ben, that was a fantastic pull. Jungle to Jungle. That was fucking amazing for this movie.
You're gonna do Tim Allen month, of course.
Yes, yes. Well, we got Jungle to Jungle. We got the Santa Claus. We should do
1 through 3.
Maybe in one episode. I don't know if I want to spend 3 weeks on that. What other Tim Allen joints we got?
Is Man of the House a Tim Allen movie, or is that?
I think that Man of the House. I think that's Tim Allen. We could do a whole episode on.
That's a different movie.
Okay, we could do a whole episode on Tim Allen getting arrested for cocaine possession. That would be good.
So it looks like your whole month is just Jungle to Jungle and all the Santa Clauses because we couldn't come up with one other movie.
Yeah.
He was in some TV shows, right? We could deviate a little bit.
Oh my God, I can't believe. I mean, it's been on my cinematic
Galaxy
spreadsheet
Quest.
forever. Galaxy Quest is a good pull. I was going to say Big Trouble. I love that movie. The movie that got filmed and was ready to release right before 9/11, and they delayed for years because of 9/11. That's actually a really funny movie. Okay, so everybody tune in next month. Chris will be back for the Tim Allen series.
Good deal.
What have I done?
All right, Rob, before we got derailed talking about Jungle to Jungle, I think you were about to give us the finance class breakdown of what happens on the trading floor.
Oh, yeah, so I guess Ben and Chris, you've seen this movie a lot. Ben, you saw it for this recording. Do you understand what happens at the end of this movie, or is it just kind of a wash?
I roughly understand.
Okay.
They short the stock to make some money. And they do it in such a way that it hurts the Duke brothers.
Since, Chris, you're in the boat where you saw it a lot as a kid, did you ever come to try and understand what was going on at the end of the movie, or otherwise?
I recall having a very it was literally like maybe when I watched this like 10 years ago, I was like, oh, here's the other 50% of the movie I had no clue what was going on when I was a kid, but still like clapped and laughed at it. You know what I mean? It's, like there was a point like in my 20s where I watched it and I was like, oh, that's what's actually going on in this movie. so I did have that epiphany at one point while watching it, and that's an experience probably a lot of people can relate to. If there's anything that is actually a good movie that you liked as a kid, watching it with a informed set of eyes, like there'll be all kinds of things you had no clue, even if it's certain word, like your vocabulary has changed, and you'll notice all kinds of stuff, and that memory stands out, even though it was like 10 years ago. I remember watching this and being like, oh, that's what's actually going on here.
Yes, I'm glad you bring that up, because I've definitely felt that way when I got older with Back to the Future. Like, when I was a little kid, I was like, oh, Back to the Future's fun. And then when I got older and watched it, I was like, oh, the movie's basically about what if I knew my parents had sex and I had to make them have sex? Like, I didn't get that when I was younger, you know?
And I mean, it's so much actually literally about that.
Yes.
Like some scenes. Yes. Yeah. It's just like wild, some scenes in that movie. Anyways.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So I'm glad you guys are asking me this, because I did do a little breakdown from what I remembered from learning in finance class. This whole thing deals with futures. And from what I researched, apparently a lot of people didn't get that when this movie came out. They thought that they were literally buying and selling orange juice. It's not orange juice, it's the future contracts on orange juice, which is very important. But Aykroyd and Murphy give the Dukes bad info. They give them the info that says the orange crop is bad, so that the Dukes think the price of OJ will rise. They have the real info that says the orange crop is good, so they know the price of OJ will fall. The Dukes, on their bad information, buy a bunch of OJ futures. They want to be able to buy orange juice at this cheap price in the future because they think it's going to go up. Other traders see this, and they buy futures as well, which drives the price up because the market now thinks that there's going to be a large demand for OJ but small supply. Aykroyd and Murphy start to sell OJ futures at the price of $1.42 because the traders think that the price will be higher in the future. So they start to buy from them. They're like, what are these fools thinking? They're going to sell OJ at $1.42 a pound, $1.42 a pound, and it's going to go way up because the Dukes clearly know something. The real crop report is revealed, and it says that the orange crop will be good. And everybody realizes that the OJ price will not be as high as they were expecting, so the future price drops drastically. Aykroyd and Murphy then immediately start to buy orange juice at 29 cents a pound. So in effect, they are literally buying tons of orange juice for 29 cents a pound and selling it for $1.42 a pound. It is the classic concept of buy low, sell high. That is what happens at the end of the movie. For the Dukes, they do the opposite bet. And that's what bankrupts them in the end of the movie, which causes one of them to have a heart attack. And we get the great scene where the guy's like, your brother's not well. We need to call an ambulance. And he goes, fuck him. I want us back on the board exchange seat. So that was my quickest distillation of what happens at the end of this movie.
I think something that kind of caught me off guard or that I didn't really know is that you could sell high and then buy low, but like having agreed to sell high in the future. Like I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, that I think that's one of the clever things about this screenplay is that they reverse the buy low, sell high. They sell high, buy low. Like they literally dig themselves a hole and then build a mound or tower on top of that hole. Like that's what Aykroyd and Murphy do, which is such a good idea. But like I said, it took me years to realize this. When I was a little kid, I was just like, good guys win! Good guys win!
So I did read something about this, and it appears that they refused to buy futures from the Duke and Duke broker.
Oh, yeah, that's how they bankrupt them, is that when they switch their position with their knowledge of the crop report, they ignore the Duke trader. So the Dukes have to stay in their hole. Absolutely.
Right. So they bought up a bunch of futures that they can't sell, even for the reduced price.
Yep. And then that's kind of like the downfall of the Dukes is when the trade commission people come to them and they're like, we have to settle accounts by the end of the day. Based on your trades, you owe us like $350 million right now.
Yeah.
And the Dukes are like, we don't have that. And it's like, yeah, no one would have that. That's their downfall, is their hubris, thinking they have the actual correct crop report.
So that was also something I found kind of interesting is they were expected to settle up on future trades now.
So they are not expected, from what I know about finance at least. I learned about this in the 2010s. I don't know about the 80s. Whenever you buy or sell a future, you are agreeing to that contract to buy or sell that commodity or stock or whatever at that future price and date, but you have to pay a certain commission to make that contract. That is what I think they had to settle up with at the end of the movie. They didn't have to worry about dealing with, what orange juice would cost in April. They had that much commissions for how much they bought at that day of the stock trading.
They bought a fuck ton of orange juice then.
Exactly. I think there's a line from one of the Dukes where they're like, we put everything we have into this because we are insider trading.
Right.
Yep. So, I mean, I don't want to get ahead. I think this will come out in cinemas and late night. This might be the most intelligent ending to a comedy movie ever. Like, I don't know if there's other intelligent comedies like this that revel in a structure as, fleshed out as capitalism.
And I'd be impressed if anyone even comes up as a challenger anytime soon. Like, it's so not in the cards.
I think the closest we get to anything like this is like heist stuff in comedy movies, where it's like they're dealing with like tricking people.
If they really do the heist well, absolutely.
Yeah,
Ben, something we've talked about, Snatch. The idea of Snatch and the diamond trade, that gets close, but that's not a comedy.
Right.
Right, but don't you think there's, on some level, as complex as a heist can be, there's something a little bit more dummy friendly about it?
Of course, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like just understanding the gold's in that safe, and we gotta let's Fast and the Furious 5, and we're gonna wrap some big chains around that safe and just plow out of the building, and drag it around the road.
Route, sure, but I mean, even the Metal Gear Solid Snake route, being stealthy,
fine.
Like, tricking people, like even that I have to agree, it's a couple notches below.
It's physical stuff, right? It's like it's stuff you can relate to without needing to have any. And I mean, like we were pointing out, like when we all first saw this movie, except Ben, we had no clue what's going on in this back half because we saw it when we were little kids.
Yeah.
But it's if nothing, it's like get some financial education into our younger lives, people. Like, come on, man. Like, how long did it take us to have any clue what was going on in this movie? That's not good. Kids need to understand this stuff earlier.
And I think that's a benefit of the movie, is that they're not trading something intangible to audiences. Like, they could have gone with gold or silver or whatever, but they go with fucking frozen concentrate orange juice. Like, that's what makes I think that's why this movie works so well, is because people saw this and they were like, I know what orange juice is. I might understand how to trade it, but I know what that is. And that's accessible. And wheat and pork bellies, that whole idea.
Yeah, I was going to say, they could have gone with pork bellies for the end thing, but I guess the weather situation doesn't make a lot of sense for pork bellies.
Yeah,
so.
They needed that crop report, absolutely.
Yeah,
because it's futures.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know. Do they sell pig bellies in the future? I'm not sure.
Oh, there's literally futures on everything, because if you boil it down, the concept of the stock market is rich people gambling.
Fair enough.
So there's just one last thing that I have to come back to that we slightly skipped over. There's a lot here. We don't want to bore everyone with a direct chronological retelling, but there was this wager that the Duke brothers made, and there's a point in the movie where Eddie Murphy overhears them settling up this wager after Billy Ray Valentine has proven that he's more than capable of taking over Winthorpe's job successfully. They settle up their wager. Do you guys have any thoughts about how they settle up their wager there?
I mean, if I'm going to smoke a joint, and try not to be seen, I guess I'm probably going to stand on a toilet. The thing that kind of stood out to me is, like, that old man hardcore gets on the ground to look under these stalls.
Yes. Yeah, Ralph Bellamy, like in his 70s or 80s, like literally gets on all fours to check the bathroom. That stood out to me too, man. Absolutely.
And the thoughts I had is like, okay, so he's old, like getting down's troublesome, but like how dirty is this floor? Like,
And he's 1983 old, not like 2020 old. Like that guy was like frail and near death.
Yeah, absolutely. And getting on the ground brought him that much closer.
But so they reveal the amount that was wagered, which is their usual amount, which is $1.
I love it.
It's fantastic. Like it kind of highlights like they're not betting because money matters to them. Like the bets are like winning the bet is about bragging rights.
Yeah, sibling rivalry. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the money. Like the $1, it makes it's so clear that the amount of money was irrelevant to them. They ruined these people's lives because they wanted to.
Yeah, and that's what makes that last bit so good when Winthorpe and Valentine are on the stock trading floor and they see them and it's like, oh, Winthorpe didn't think I could make a bunch of money and rip you off at the same time. How much did we bet? Here's your $1. And I'm like, oh my God, like that is the most basic comedy concept, but it works so well in this movie.
And you know, it reminds me a lot of something you guys had on a recent episode, which will probably be 2 or 3 months ago by the time this one comes out. But when you guys did your Treehouse of Horror episode, as Mr. Burns and Smithers are removing all of the beer and cutting the cable to the mansion where that Homer's going to be watching in the Shining parody, Smithers is like, "Don't you think doing this is what caused all the previous caretakers to go crazy and kill their families?" And Burns is like, "Huh. Tell you what, if we come back and everyone's slaughtered, I owe you a Coke." And it's just
yes,
it's exactly
absolutely
the same thing. He's just like they're playing with people's lives, and there's just a mild token of victory, just affirming who was right at the end of the game.
I think I'm realizing it in this discussion that I love the fact that the bet takes more winning and the bet takes more mention or takes more rights than the actual monetary value behind it. I love that stuff. And hell, Ben, I think you remember this from back in the day. I don't know if I did this with you, but I would go to concerts with people and I was like, let's bet on what the first song they play is.
Yeah, definitely.
And they were like, what do you want to bet? And I would go $1 because I had Trading Places in mind. Because it's not about the idea that I'm going to take money from you. It's about the fact that we just get to gamble about this idea.
Yeah, it's about being right. The most important thing of all time.
I mean, I definitely was with you at shows, and I don't think I ever won. I don't remember if you ever won either, though.
I think there were a lot of times with you and me where it was like, wow, they didn't play either song we picked, so fuck it. Let's just enjoy the concert. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, Chris. That was something I almost forgot. That reveal that it's $1 is so fantastic. That's one of my favorite parts of the movie, for sure.
Before we get off the topic of the movie and get onto the follow-up, sure. I do have to mention, like I mentioned earlier that I didn't think the gorilla was real. We didn't even talk about the gorilla.
Yes, the sexually frustrated gorilla, as it turns out, in the end of the movie.
that rapes Mr. Beaker or whatever his name is, and for whatever reason is in a cage traveling to New York on New Year's.
It was the 80s.
Yep. So that was just this is a time period I took that as SNL sketch. They have to have a gorilla.
I mean, yeah, you could. That's true, but it's the same time period where Mike Tyson owns 10 tigers at his house. So, like, who knows what's going on, right? It's all
fair enough. I think something else, like the costume party on New Year's. Like, is that a thing? I'm not familiar with costume parties for New Year's.
Ooh, that's actually a good question.
Like Halloween, obviously, but New Year's, I'm not sure. I don't
know. I don't dress up for New Year's. I don't even dress up for Halloween.
I mean, this was this was the 80s. Maybe it was a thing back then, but that has died.
I think that is probably just another 80s thing. We got to research that.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. And I did not think about that because the way that the costume party is introduced is Jim Belushi going, New Year's, party started. And I'm like, okay, that's just Jim Belushi being a crazy fucking person like he was in the 80s.
Something else that like kind of sticks out to me about that whole thing is like when I see the costume party, I'm like, oh, they're going to use the costume party as a means of disguise. And, like, they're going to be dressed up in costumes that fit for the costume party. But they actually dressed up as characters.
That's actually so jarring now that you mention it. It's like, What was that about? They could have just had crazy costumes, and they didn't have to, like, do accents or anything.
Definitely. And like the priest with the alcohol problem, he was just like something about religion and moderation. Like he could have, maybe, you know, and maybe he was just supposed to be a costume and he was in character, but like,
well, it's literally just every single one of them down to the alcohol problem priest they're all cultural stereotypes.
Yeah.
It's so heavily unnecessary given the costume party next door. But I don't know.
I'm glad you bring that up, Ben. I almost forgot about that. That is a fantastic line where the Irish priest shows up and he's like, "How about a little Irish whiskey for this holiday?" And Eddie Murphy goes, "No, I don't drink. It's against my religion." And as Denholm Elliott takes a swig from the flask, he goes, I have no problem with religion as long as it's in moderation. Like that is a fantastic line of dialogue.
Could I offer either of you two gentlemen a wee jolt of Irish whiskey to usher in the new year?
Not for me, pal.
I do not drink. It is against my religion.
I always say religion is a fine thing, taken in moderation.
Beef jerky?
Oh, no, son, thank you very much. No, it gives me the wind, something terrible.
So I guess the only thing that kind of saves that for me is like maybe these characters had no idea that other people did costume parties for New Year's.
They were just trying to get the drop on Clarence Beeks and were unaware.
Just so happened. Yeah.
Dude, that's a great point. I've never thought about that movie this way before, and it's insane.
It's probably just one of those things where either the costume party or their disguises came first in the writing process, and they didn't do enough work to line up the two things after they added the second one. And you'd be surprised. It's just shocking sometimes the dialogue that's not changed in movies, like that's just left in just because it's actually a process because of unions and stuff. Yeah, it's like it's actually work to change the line of dialogue. It's not like you can freestyle stuff, but you really worry about stepping on toes depending who's directing it and all that. And it's just amazing sometimes the things that are left in, even though an entire character could change, but their dialogue will stay the same. And we could do a lot of tangents on that, but we'll save the time.
Well, that's actually really interesting. I was not aware of that. I thought you were just going to say, like, as an oversight that they don't change the dialogue correctly when they make changes here and there. I would believe that 100% as a coder, seeing the number of defects people create when they're trying to fix other defects.
Yeah, unions, if somebody's got a Writers Guild of America WGA credit, it takes work to get them off that credit. And, like, a lot of movies get made where they're like, okay, we can't change X, Y, and Z because of union rules, so how do we make it work for our movie? A lot of times to the detriment, a lot of times not to. It's one of those behind-the-scenes things, but it's very interesting. I'm glad you bring that up, Chris.
Well, even whether it's a technical rule or not, sometimes it's just people don't feel comfortable changing someone else's work who may or may not be on set and present. So there's all kinds of variables there, right?
Yeah, but, hell yeah. Talk about Zack Snyder and Joss Whedon on Justice League. That was the last big example of it, absolutely.
What was it? What's that guy's name from All Superheroes Must Die?
Jason Trost.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of like writing the script, directing it, just producing it.
That's one of the benefits of doing everything in a movie.
Yeah, he was able to just cut out entire pages. So.
But don't do it like that one time Dan Aykroyd did it. It didn't work that way. I don't know what he did, but it didn't work out properly for him.
This is my movie, goddammit.
So you're talking about the movie with the prosthetic penis nose? Like, I was totally just reminded of, like, Gonzo from the Muppet Babies, Like,
once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Absolutely.
I hope I just ruined that for everybody.
Everybody get yourself a couple of dogs! That's a throwback to Nothing But Trouble. I think the last thing I want to say about this movie, in terms of background, I don't think I have anything else to say about the actual movie. I have always been intrigued by the fact that this was originally written by Harrison Weingrod, who also wrote Twins, Kindergarten Cop, Space Jam. Like, they are established writers. When they wrote this movie, they imagined it, and John Landis did as well, as a Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor joint. Which, of course, Blazing Saddles, Stir Crazy, Blue Streak, that type of stuff. As far as the legend goes, this movie did not get made with Wilder and Pryor, because as it was being cast, Richard Pryor infamously set himself on fire while either freebasing cocaine or pouring rum on himself and lighting himself on fire. There is still no true answer onto how he hurt himself that way. But that's why we got Eddie Murphy in his second movie role ever, because Richard Pryor, I mean, I'll probably put the clip in because it's great. I love Richard Pryor. He does a whole stand-up thing about how he had third-degree burns on his body because he was doing drugs. And I just love the fact that Eddie Murphy might not have been the big movie star that we have him as now if Richard Pryor wasn't doing drugs. I mean, at the same time, we might not have had Richard Pryor as the great comedic mind if he wasn't doing drugs as well. So I'm very torn.
And you know, the moral of the story is that determinism is real and free will doesn't exist. And everything good that ever happens to you is just because of a twist of fate, and anything bad that ever happens to you just the same.
So we're all going to go freebase cocaine after this?
I thought about saying, now listen, should I talk about freebasing or something? And people say, well, no, because then people start doing it. No, I got to talk about what happened to me on freebasing. Freebasing, I freebased about 8 months straight. My bitch left me, I went crazy. But I fell in love with this pipe. This pipe controlled my very being. This motherfucker say, don't answer the phone. We have smoking to do. All the pipe is talking about, now come on. Don't put me down anywhere where I might fall. Because it's 2 in the morning and it's hard to get one of me. And when I first did it, I knew it was going to fuck me up, but I had to do it.
It's fate.
You might as well.
So Gene Wilder was supposed to be Winthorpe then?
Yes, yeah. So Gene Wilder was going to be the snobbish dude, and Pryor was going to be the con man.
I mean, I could see Gene Wilder in that role, but I like Aykroyd's performance. So.
Oh, yeah. No, Aykroyd crushes it. I think I would feel a little bit bad as, not watching these movies when they came out, but knowing Gene Wilder is in his roles, as Willy Wonka, as his character in Blue Streak, Blazing Saddles. I don't know if I would have the same respect for him. I don't want him to be a snob. Yeah. Like, he plays a snob technically as Willy Wonka, but Willy Wonka is much more owning that, where he never has to he never has to undo that snobbishness in Willy Wonka. Like, I love the fact that he plays Willy Wonka as, I have 5 children coming to my factory and I want them to fail so I can run this company. But it turns out that he finds a good replacement. I don't want Willy Wonka to halfway through the movie go, oh, I was wrong. Now I'm going to be a good guy. Like, every scene that Willy Wonka has where he's angry at children is what makes that movie work.
Sure. No change of heart.
And what's kind of cool about what you're saying about the original casting choices there is that, like, you can imagine that wouldn't have been a disaster, and it probably would have still been a good movie. And it's not a crime of culture that we missed out on seeing that movie. It would have been good, but like, I think it could have been just as good. It's just things play out differently afterwards. It's not like one of those times where you hear the original casting selection and you're like, well, it never would have had the critical acclaim it did if they had gone with their original plan. That probably still would have been pretty good.
Exactly. I have no problem with Pryor in the Eddie Murphy role, but I do not want to see, like I just said, to reiterate, I do not want to see Gene Wilder as a stuck-up businessman. Like, I do not want to see that as him going, we should trade pork bellies today, sir. Like, I don't want that at all.
I agree with you. I don't want it either. We're lucky that Pryor was injured.
And then,
I love it.
Because, then Gene Wilder would have gone crazy and started talking about aliens and selling vodka and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yes,
so, like,
definitely.
And we wouldn't have got all the great films he did subsequent. So it's for the best things played out this way.
Absolutely.
I'm sure Pryor agrees.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know if he did agree. He's dead now, but so was Gene Wilder. I think Gene Wilder died a few years ago.
Yeah, not too long ago. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, that was my biggest complaint. As another tangent, when Steven Spielberg was making Ready Player One, he went to Gene Wilder and is like, "I want you to play the owner of the Oasis role." And Gene Wilder was like, "I am in poor health. I have like onset Alzheimer's. Like, I cannot do this." And Spielberg was like, "No, I think I can work around you." And it's like, Spielberg, go fuck yourself. Like, you cannot work around somebody who's retired. I really hated that. Thankfully, of course, we get Mark Rylance in that role. I don't know if either of you have seen Ready Player One. But I hated the fact that Steven Spielberg was like, "You're an actor I look up to. I don't care what your health is like. I want you in this movie." It's like, screw yourself, Mr. Spielberg.
I respect the hell out of him not taking the part, even though it was Spielberg, because like Spielberg in modern times, anyways, like don't worry about it. And like, but speaking, we're also sort of on the eve of the passing of Sean Connery, and here's another guy who very successfully just said, "I'm fucking done. And you're not going to see me for the next 25 years until I die."
Mm-hmm.
And he pulled it off. He wasn't. I think they might have dragged him back to. I don't know I think his last IMDb credit was a James Bond video game, but that might have just been archival material.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure. When this is actually a good point. I'm glad you reminded me, Chris, because I talked with a few people about Sean Connery's death. When it was announced that he died at the age of 90, so he had a good life, a great career. You know, don't get me wrong, I love Highlander, I love The Untouchables, the De Palma film, I love Last Crusade, like I love Sean Connery. But the first thing I thought of was that interview he gave where he was like, "Sometimes a woman needs a good schmacking." And the interviewer doubled down and was like, are you saying it's okay to hit women? He goes, "Well, sometimes women won't let things go. They want to have the last word. And when you give them the last word, they want to keep going. So then it's okay to hit them." And I'm like, oh, Sean Connery, you're from a different time.
Okay, so let's not forget it's Barbara Walters from The View, which also makes it somehow more funny.
Yes.
And the juxtaposition there. And I had one exchange with someone about Sean Connery's passing. It was a coworker, and that was the first thing she brought up. "Well, he's kind of a dick. Remember this interview?" There is your legacy encapsulated in one late 80s interview. So it's just be careful. You know, even back in 1987, you had to be very careful what you expressed publicly.
Yes. I'm going to go on record. I'm going to say it right now. Everybody who wants to get at me in the future, take this clip. Every once in a while, a movie needs a good pirating. I'm digging my own grave, as I have been for 2.5 years.
It's not a victimless crime, okay?
You wouldn't steal a car.
You don't know me. I might steal a car.
Okay, so any last thoughts on Trading Places from Ben or Chris before we get into our questions?
I think I'm done.
I'm good. I would implore you to watch it again, but there's something drastically wrong with you if you've listened to a podcast this long about it and haven't seen it. So just stop and watch it, and if you have, you'll appreciate why we've been saying that.
Yeah, usually we do like total bombs on Cinemodities, and now we're doing something that was literally popular, so definitely check it out. For sure. So I guess that brings us to our questions. I'm very excited to get to this because Chris is a newcomer to this concept. I hate that I don't get to drop the concept of the restaurant on him. That's one of my favorite things when I have guests on this podcast and I get to explain to them that we own and operate a restaurant, and that's the point of this podcast. But you're aware of that. So let's start with Cinemodities and Late Night. Cinemodity status, Late Night status. Chris, I'll throw it over to you since you are the recommender and to put you in the hot seat. What do you think for both of these?
All right, so whether or not this is a cinemodity, I'm going to go with a hard no, and that's because it was successful at the time of its release. It was generally considered to be a comedy that you could. I mean, could you bring your kids to it? I suppose you could. Because it might be just before PG-13 came out, so like I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think literally a year before PG-13 existed.
So would this have been rated R just because it has? We should know this.
We didn't even talk about the boobies.
Yeah, so like, is it rated R just because of that? I don't know, but I feel like I was watching this when I was a kid, so I guess there was some hard TV edits. But anyways, something that was just generally this well received at the time of its release, I find it. I couldn't call that a cinemodity. It would be against my better judgment. And also, when I looked into its current reception, people hadn't turned on it in the way that I thought culture might have by now. So I still, with that in mind, I can't call it a cinemodity. As far as a late night movie, I may or may not have employed it in this exact style. And I believe, as far as the parameters of being a late night movie or not go, it is a big success, especially when you have an audience who has not seen it before.
Okay. Ben, I want to throw it over to you next for the same Cinemodities and Late Night.
I think Chris really kind of nailed it for cinematography. It's not a cinematic oddity. It's maybe a little weird that they didn't die and then switch places as ghosts.
There was no lightning strike. What's up with that?
And nobody got hit by a bus or whatever. So like that was a little strange. There was no manslaughter in it, which maybe was a little weird for this guy, for the whatever. But no, I don't think it's a cinematography. Late night, absolutely. I would recommend this to any number of people. I don't even think this is a know your audience. This is like most people, I think, can access this movie, unless people are really offended by tits, or I suppose also I've known some people who would be way too off put by the racially insensitive things.
Sure.
That they wouldn't. Well, let's just say they wouldn't get the point of the movie. So I probably wouldn't suggest that they watch it. Like if you're gonna read about it, don't watch it. But other than that, yeah, check it out. It's a good movie.
I guess on the topic of boobies, because I can't believe we got this whole way without talking about the
so
boobies.
Many tits.
There is a good bit of upper body female nudity. I don't know the actress's name. I didn't dig deep enough. But when Eddie Murphy goes upstairs to his bedroom and the woman jumps out of bed and she's like, "I've been waiting for you, Billy Ray." She's beautiful. Like that is like John Landis knew what woman to use for that shot. Absolutely. Love her. So now, I think I'm going to be the dissenter. I'm going to give this a yes to cinematography. This is a pure early 80s comedy strangeness film that I wish we had more of today. I cannot get over the fact that it turns into a commodity trading slapstick thriller. I cannot get over that fact. I love that this movie is so different from how it ends versus how it starts that I have to say yes to cinematography. That the final scene, which I love and I think is totally tractable for any audience, is commodities trading at the World Trade Center floor. I love that odd aspect of it. That's where I'm going to dissent, but I'm going to agree with you guys. Yes, this is definitely a late night movie. You got good laughs. And one of the things I always want from late night movie is for it to give way to interesting discussion. And I think right off the bat, if you watch this with somebody, you're going to basically switch between laughing about it and talking about nature versus nurture. And I couldn't ask for a better compliment to a funny movie than an actual discussion. But I fucking love the stock trading stuff. That is so weird to me. I don't think a movie like this could ever be made again. Take out the racially insensitive stuff. Any studio would go, one, nobody understands what trading stocks is like. And two, if it's not on their computer. And two, nobody understands like the concept of the devolvement of this movie from the trading places, the Prince and the Pauper-esque story, into capitalism. I think that studios today would go, no, people don't like capitalism. Like, we need capitalism to lose. Like, if this movie was made today, studios would go, we need the World Trade Center to blow up. And everybody would be like, wait, do you understand what you just said? And they go, oh, yes, sorry. No, let's do what The Dark Knight Rises did, where they hold up the trading floor at gunpoint with Bane. That's why I think this movie is a cinematography. So that's where I'm dissenting from you guys.
I do want to comment on what you said about the way the movie ends. There was the bit where Winthorpe is like getting his shotguns ready and he's just going to go blow some people away or something.
Yes.
It definitely could have had that ending, and I'm not going to say I would have disliked that ending, but that ending is definitely the trading floor thing is definitely a more highbrow ending, if you will.
That's assault with a deadly weapon, man.
I could have enjoyed a good shotgun rampage.
See, that's where it turns into the Dark Knight Rises thing, where they hold up at gunpoint the whole trading floor so they can bankrupt Bruce Wayne.
It could have gone either way.
Yeah, and I think, that I hope Christopher Nolan, there's a big thing on this podcast. We think every movie ever influenced Christopher Nolan. This was the influence for Dark Knight Rises, the trading floor scene and the shotguns.
Solid, I buy it.
At the same time, the last time I talked to anybody about The Dark Knight Rises, they said the same thing to me that I heard about this movie. I have no idea what's going on when they make Bruce Wayne buy a million options.
Which proves why they just don't try this stuff that much anymore.
Yep.
It's just not as accessible as a giant safe being dragged down the road behind a transport truck.
I'm not going to lie, I fucking watched a movie called Hurricane Heist recently, where they just were like, hurricane disaster movie, heist movie, same movie.
Hell yeah. Ben, even remember the end of Southland Tales? They rip out the ATM from the wall and drive it down the street to trying to get to Mexico. That's what audiences want. Okay, good shit. And that brings us to the most important part of the episode. As I always say, people skip the first 2.5 hours of our recordings just to get to how are we going to run this restaurant. And usually in FansGiving, I get to read what the person who requested the movie thought about snacks, because we always reach out to him. Before I invited Chris on this episode, I reached out to him about some snacks. I did not write those down. I did not pull them up, because since we have him here, I would love to hear. Chris, with your understanding of this movie, the Cinemati's Restaurant, what do you want to add to the menu, to the event list, to anything? Please, we're excited to hear.
All right. So, yeah, I did have the benefit of a lot of time to think about this. My initial answer would be I would like to add to the menu of the Cinemati's Restaurant smoked salmon served inside a well-used Mall Santa jacket, which it's been sitting in for no less than 4 hours.
Okay.
And that's and you know, after rewatch, and I said that without having rewatched the movie. So after having rewatched the movie, I would like to add a second item, which is simply in the sandwiches section of the menu. I would like it to say BLT and then further describe what's on a BLT: bacon, lettuce, and tomatoes.
Are you gonna also insist that we describe bacon as thinly sliced pork belly?
I mean, I'm just very adamant that the bold main listing is just the acronym, and then it says bacon, lettuce, and tomatoes. That's all I'm concerned about.
Okay.
And it can be a standard BLT.
I had a sense that you were going to bring this up, and I figured all of us would talk about this some way. I want to just extend this a little bit further because it's exactly what I had in my thoughts. On the menu, like you said, the bold stance or the item name would be BLT, but I wanted to go a little further and devote an entire page of the menu to an excruciating, painful detail of what a BLT is. Like, full description of every item in any way that we could. So it's literally, you're flipping through like a restaurant menu, you get to one page that says BLT, and then there's just a wall of text.
and if it works perfectly, your reaction, their patron's reaction should be to stare directly in the eyes of the server.
See, I was also thinking that the server, if somebody ordered the BLT, the server would have to recite the entire description to the person. Oh, that's good. That's good. Okay. I don't know if you have any more. I want to throw it over to Ben now because we like to toss it around here. Ben, what did you think about snacks for this episode? Other than I mean, if you have anything to add to the BLT, I think this is great fun. We're just making this the most egregiously annoying object on the menu now.
No, I mean, I think the full page, like, we're going to cover that it's pork belly.
Yes.
We're probably going to cover that there's future trades about pork belly.
Oh my God, that's great. You know how some restaurants, if you order something, it says, like, they don't list the price, but they say market price? We would describe the state of the market every day in the menu and how much we bought it for.
It sounds pretty solid to me.
Make it financially steeped as the end of this movie is.
So I think the thing I want to add is it's kind of like an amusement ride. Like, you get to experience the Trading Places, story, but really what happens is we just frame you and send you to jail. And
we're going to plant PCP in somebody?
Well, I mean, we can plant it in them if you're really interested in doing that. I was going to say on them. But no, it doesn't have to be PCP.
It's heroin.
It can be heroin. It can be coke. It can be, whatever you want, really.
Okay,
Speed.
Are you also pitching that we have, like, our own in-house institution of a prison? Or are we, like, actually shipping them out to...
No, we're calling the real cops. They're
okay, that's where I'm concerned, because I don't think we want the real cops in our restaurant.
I mean, we could have, like, a shoot out the restaurant. Like, we just drop them off into a police station.
like a vestibule?
I think Rob's thinking more of like a themed room, like medieval times type experience, where you're paying a little extra for a bit of dinner theater, where you're held up in jail and there's some fake guards and other
somebody plants marked $50 bills in your pocket.
So I'm not opposed to the dinner theater aspect, but I really think that the patron needs to stay in jail forever.
Okay. No, I think this matches up because we have pitched that, as I'm sure our audience and Chris and Ben remember, that we, in the kids portion of the restaurant, Sin E Modities, there's a bone pit, not a ball pit, but a bone pit, and all the bones are from real people, and Mariska Hargitay finds different bones in the bone pit that are related to cold cases of hers, and that's where Law & Order Cinemodities got its start. So if we blend in Law & Order Cinemodities with, like, Law & Order Drug Police, or Drugs and Order Cinemodities Police, we'll think about that name, then it works fine. As long as the cops aren't worrying about what we're serving to people, no problem.
I mean, we could get them on the payroll the way the Dukes have their cops. You know?
Ooh, I like that. Do some bribes, absolutely.
What about you, Rob? What are you offering snack-wise today?
So I think to add to what you said, Chris, about the Santa character, or at least something served in the Santa suit, I was definitely thinking that we would have a Santa walk-around character whose suit was just as dirty or dirtier as Dan Aykroyd's in this film, and there would be food in his or her pockets. And if somebody, ever got angry and they were like, we haven't gotten our food in a while or whatever, and they had to see, like, where's the wait staff? I want to ask about the status of our food. I want to complain to the establishment. They would find the Santa character who would pull out a slice of roast beef for the table to tide them over. Because we didn't even talk about the great scene where Dan Aykroyd is planting drugs in Eddie Murphy's desk, and when he tries to pull out a gun, he pulls out a slice of beef. So my thought, the Santa costume, was that we're going to have a character walking around in a dirty Santa costume with a bunch of food in their pockets.
Yeah, well, I was like, that's good. That's real different from mine. I was more imagining it like, how you might smoke some meat with like a big palm leaf or something. Instead of that, it's just the Santa jacket. Just it's getting all the nice aromas from the dirty Santa jacket smoked into the protein.
We do have to have both. You're absolutely right. Because I love that idea as you just described it. That really solidified it for me. I also want to add that the Santa walk-around character that we have, when Christmas season comes around, little kids can sit on his lap and say what they want for Christmas and get to leave with terribly, terribly raw and old shrimp from his pockets.
That's great. And then also, like, we should probably also add in the beverage section concentrated orange juice futures, which show up in the form of a printed paper as a future that you don't actually get to drink. And even if you did, it would be in the form of concentrate, but you don't get it anyways.
That's great. A customer goes, I would like some of the frozen concentrated orange juice, and they just get delivered like a slip of paper. You can come back in April to get this beverage. No, I think that ties into my last snack was a true dish for the restaurant. Maybe we call it like the Trading Places dish or like the Eddie Murphy rule dish because we talked about that financial thing. But it is beef jerky served with Irish whiskey and frozen orange juice. But here's the thing. It's beef jerky on a plate. The Irish whiskey is in a cup on the side like an actual beverage. And then also on the plate with the beef jerky is a solid fucking frozen block of orange juice.
I don't know what's more inconvenient, it being frozen as concentrate or a future. I don't know. Both are thoroughly infuriating.
Would you like frozen orange juice now, or would you like real orange juice 3 months from now?
I think you need to include Swedish meatballs on your plate.
Oh, okay. Maybe like that's like the appetizer or something.
But if you pick 3 months from now, we'll guarantee this current market price.
Yes. See, that's what Zach would shoot down if he was here. He's like, we don't need any more financial troubles in the restaurant. We don't need to introduce futures. Oh, that's great. Those are all the snacks I had. Any others from you guys?
I think I'm good.
That's it for me. I think that
right
there's some of the best options you could possibly. Who could ask for more than what this movie has provided?
Yes, I think before we exit the snack portion of this, Chris, have you ever been to the Cinemodities restaurant in person?
I don't know if is this like a meta, like in character answer or a literal answer? Like, because I haven't isn't it like located inside like a dimensional void of some kind? I can never get the story straight.
That might be the perfect answer. I don't know how to respond because I can't get the story straight.
I'm not familiar with the canon.
If you had a meta character answer, that would have been great, but I think what you gave is probably the best possible response to that question.
Great. I'm glad that didn't disappoint. I'd very much love to visit it. You should set up some sort of app VR experience of some kind.
Now, that would be really cool. That would be really cool. So yes, so I think all in all, with all that out of the way, Chris, thank you so much for being here. I think this was good fun. You had a lot of insight on this movie and why you want to talk about it. That was great to discuss. I think you fit right in here, as Ben said at the start, with the Cinemodities family. Would you have anything that you want to pitch for our audience where they can find you or anything like that at all?
I'm not too active. I'm not permanently on any podcasts at the moment. You can find me at the Chris Porteous on Instagram. I do a little bit of photography over there. That's probably the main thing.
Well, I think don't sell yourself short. I think out of the last 4 episodes of Knights of Vader, you've been on 3 because I didn't invite you to the one I was on for Spaceballs.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. But those last 4 episodes were over like a 7-month period, so it's not saying that much.
He is the greatest Canadian Star Wars collector as far as we're concerned. But other than that, Ben, I'll throw it over to you. Any final thoughts where people can find you about this episode or anything like that? I did that totally out of order.
Final thoughts on the episode. Chris is right. Watch the movie. It's a good one. Where you can find me, at Electrum Comics on Instagram.
It is populated now, right?
Yeah, there are drawings there now.
Nice.
They're not for the webcomic. They are character art that I was doing for practice for the webcomic. But there is some drawings there. And I'm kind of making that my primary Instagram. So at Ben Q Stanley it does have some of the more recent photos, but it is not where you should look. So
everybody, if you want to send Ben memes, hit him up at Electrum Comics.
That's right.
And be sure when you send him a meme in the text box, I don't know how Instagram works, you say, "Don't you fucking dare send me a meme again." No one will get that joke, but that's what we live for on Cinemodities.
That's right. So
good stuff. I always say check out Ben's Electrum Comics. It's really cool stuff. He's doing some artwork for the Patreon on Cinemodities, which I want to plug again as well. Which you can see in our usual kind of VHS, status type of thing. We've done some good work over on the Cinemodities Patreon. We think there's some movies that wouldn't come up regularly on this podcast, so we get to talk about them over there, which is really, really cool. We haven't picked what we're doing for December the 1st. I think it will be Christmas-related, though, from the little ideas we were throwing around. We're going to try and keep it that way. But other than that, final thoughts. Chris, I want to thank you so much for coming on once again. This has been good fun. And I think the last thing that I get to say to everybody is, how do we end this episode? I have an idea. I'm going to pitch it. If you have any contradictory thoughts, keep them to yourselves. I think the best way to end this episode is the opening credits theme in reverse, which is the overture from Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro. We've never had classical music in reverse on Cinemodities before, so I think why not give it a shot? And they both kept it to themselves, folks.
Can we get a track of kids screaming because they run over their fingers with those furniture mover things?
I don't know if that's like a B-roll I can find on YouTube or if I'll actually have to run over some kids' figures to get that recording.
Or like whatever that terrible song they were playing in the party scene was. That was. I mean, the classical music. I bet that's going to sound pretty good in reverse. It's going to be almost.
I don't know what
too
song
natural.
That was. What was the song you mentioned at the start, Ben? The Canadian one.
You
were like, Chris, let me be culturally insensitive to you off mic.
That was Out for a Rip by Be Rich and Friends.
Out for a Rip. Okay.
It's not. There's no like melody to it or anything. I don't know how playing it backwards would sound.
Okay, good. I'm glad you told me this because that's something I always have to think of. But at the same
it's Canadian
time,
art, so it has no melody whatsoever.
Oh, that might be the way to end it. That might be perfect.
Forget about you.
Bye.